Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleep Science. Tonight, you're not sinking into a pillow, you're sinking through clouds so thick with sulfur that sunlight turns to molten gold before it even reaches you. The air tastes like battery acid, and every breath you take would crush your lungs flat if you weren't safely tucked inside an imaginary pressure bubble. Venus, Earth's so-called twin, glows like a jewel from afar, but down here it's more like a furnace wrapped in perfume. You probably won't survive this, but that's okay. The point tonight is to drift, not to live through it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I like knowing which corner of the world I'm whispering into. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're falling slowly through the sulphurous dawn of Venus. Above you, sunlight filters through 20 kilometers of cream-colored haze. It should be bright, but the light scatters and bends until everything glows in syrupy gold. The planet turns lazily beneath you, so slowly that one day here lasts longer than a Venusian year. And yet the winds scream around the planet at hundreds of kilometers an hour, dragging the clouds faster than sound. You hang suspended in that gale like a dust mote in honey, feeling the atmospheric layers sliding against one another. It's strangely quiet inside your imagined cocoon. The outside air is mostly carbon dioxide, laced with nitrogen, sulfur dioxide, and microscopic droplets of sulfuric acid. Each droplet acts like a tiny mirror, giving the sky a pale sheen that would be beautiful if it weren't lethal. The temperature here, in the upper cloud decks, still hugs as a relatively bearable 30 degrees Celsius. Tropical, you might say, if you ignored the acid drizzle. You could almost sip a drink through a metal straw and pretend it's a seaside fog. Almost. Below you, the pressure builds. Every 100 meters feels heavier, denser, more unforgiving. The sunlight dims to a dusky bronze. Scientists have compared this descent to diving into the deep sea, but at the bottom, instead of water, you'll find rock hot enough to glow dull red. Still, it's hard not to admire the view. Venus doesn't have clouds like Earth's. These are more like endless curtains, folded in ribbons that stretch around the planet. They form streaks and ovals visible even through telescopes on Earth. Historians still argue whether early astronomers truly saw patterns shifting on Venus's surface, or if they were simply watching these high-altitude cloud belts breathing around the world. For all its hostility, Venus holds a strange grace. The Romans named it after the goddess of love and beauty for good reason. It outshines every star except the sun and moon. When ancient skywatchers tracked its bright wanderings, they thought it was two separate stars, the morning star and the evening star. Only later did they realize it was one body circling close to the sun, flashing twice each day like a celestial heartbeat. That recognition connected civilizations, Babylonian, Greek, Mayan, in their shared awe of this gleaming mystery, and that mystery deepens as you drift lower. Scientists believe that billions of years ago, Venus might have looked almost like Earth. Oceans may have shimmered under soft sunlight. Rain could have fallen that wasn't made of acid. But something tipped the balance. Perhaps the sun grew hotter. Perhaps the atmosphere thickened just a little too much. The oceans evaporated, the carbon cycle snapped, and the runaway greenhouse effect began, trapping heat faster than the planet could shed it. Within a few million years, the paradise boiled away. You imagine that transformation like a fever spreading across a once calm body. There's a wistful thought in that image, how fragile a world can be. One too many degrees, one too much carbon, and everything tips. You picture early Venus. Blue and serene, its continents edged with white clouds. Now it's an inferno wrapped in golden smog. The sound outside grows lower, almost like thunder. Some researchers think lightning crackles here, though others insist what we see are just static flashes caused by friction in the dense air. Either way, the light flickers faintly through the haze, a silent strobe pulsing in time with the planet's hidden heart. A quirky fact floats by. In the 16th century, Galileo was the first to observe Venus's phases through a telescope, crescent, half, full, proving it orbited the sun. He risked ridicule for saying so, challenging the Earth-centered view of the universe. Imagine him squinting through primitive glass, staring at this same glowing dot we're now falling toward. and realizing it proved like the moon. He couldn't have known that beneath the beauty lurked pressures that could crush a submarine. Your descent slows for a moment, caught in an updraft that smells of brimstone and static. You could almost swear the air vibrates with some deep ancient sound, maybe the planet itself humming. Venus rotates so slowly that its core might be more molten than expected, stirring magnetic whispers in the atmosphere. Historians of science still argue whether Venus ever had a magnetic field strong enough to shield it from solar winds. If it did, it's long gone, stripped away like skin under the relentless blast of the sun. Somewhere far below, the surface waits, hidden beneath this glowing ocean of gas, but not yet. For now, you hover at the edge of two worlds, the calm above, the inferno below. The sunlight breaks apart into amber and rose, tinting every droplet around you. It feels like floating inside a burning pearl, and though you can't breathe here, you catch yourself pretending to inhale, to taste the metal and dust and age in the air. A small joke slips through your thoughts. Somewhere, a beauty product brand is trying to make Venusian glow happen, blissfully unaware that the secret ingredient would be sulfuric acid and heartbreak. You smile anyway. There's humour in surviving only through imagination. The planet turns, and dawn becomes indistinguishable from dusk. Time feels circular here. Direction loses meaning. You're weightless, drifting between what was and what could have been, suspended inside the golden womb of a world that once might have held oceans, clouds, and maybe, just maybe, dreams not so different from yours. You keep drifting in that golden haze, the air around you pulsing like a living thing, until the horizon begins to tilt, slowly, lazily, revealing the curve of Venus beneath your feet. From here, she looks deceptively gentle. Pale honey clouds, smooth as whipped cream, stretching endlessly. Earth's twin, they call her, though she's the kind of twin who went to the same school, got the same report cards, but then decided to major in mayhem instead. Venus and Earth were born side by side, forged from the same swirling solar dust. Same diameter, nearly same mass, both wrapped in rocky shells and cloaked by thick atmospheres. But somewhere along the way, one stayed temperate, while the other decided to audition for the role of Hell in a science documentary. As you hover between the clouds, you try to imagine them as sisters, one calm, blue and oceanic, the other feverish, veiled, and unpredictable. Venus orbits just a bit closer to the Sun, about 70% of Earth's distance, but that tiny difference meant everything. A few million kilometers closer, and sunlight became too fierce, evaporation too quick, water too temporary. Heat built up, the air thickened, and soon there was no going back. Historians still argue whether Venus's transformation was inevitable, or whether it was a cosmic accident, a butterfly effect in planetary form. Maybe if her rotation had been faster or her magnetic field stronger, she'd still shimmer with blue oceans today. You can almost picture it. Two planets side by side, both with clouds drifting softly, continents stretching across their surfaces. Maybe even primitive life swimming in shallow Venusian seas. For a few 100 million years after their births, the two might have looked almost identical from space, a double vision of home. It's eerie to think that our planet's gentleness isn't guaranteed, but borrowed. Earth could have gone the same way if her greenhouse effect had slipped just a little out of control. The wind tugs at you again, thick and roaring, but oddly steady. The airspeed up here can hit 300 kilometers per hour, yet you feel only a slow rocking motion, as if swaying in syrup. You watch faint waves ripple through the clouds, like the texture of milk when stirred too fast. Venus's atmosphere moves faster than the planet itself, a phenomenon called superrotation. No one really knows why it happens. Some think it's the heat distribution, others a mystery of fluid dynamics. A running joke among planetary scientists goes that Venus doesn't spin, her clouds just gossip too quickly. A flicker of light catches your attention, a faint glint of something metallic tumbling below. For a moment, you imagine it's one of the old probes, a shard of human curiosity drifting in circles. The first spacecraft to visit Venus was Mariner 2, back in 1962, making humanity's first successful planetary flyby. It measured temperatures that shattered expectations, hotter than an oven even miles above the surface. That data forced scientists to face the truth. Venus wasn't Earth's twin paradise, but Earth's cautionary tale. Before Mariner, textbooks pictured jungles and misty swamps under those clouds. After Mariner, the dream vaporized like water on molten rock. You pass through a thinner patch of cloud, and for a brief moment, light floods your vision. Below, the surface gleams faintly in gold and rust tones. You can make out the faint outlines of highlands and plains, Ishtar Terra, Aphrodite Terra, names that sound poetic enough to disguise the reality of crushing pressure and searing heat. It's hard not to feel small here. On Earth, your weight might press footprints into sand. On Venus, the air itself presses harder than the deepest ocean trench. There's a certain irony in calling Venus the planet of love. The Romans might have been disappointed to learn that their goddess's namesake rains acid and melts lead. Then again, love's always had a dangerous side, hasn't it? You grin to yourself, imagining a romantic getaway brochure. Come experience eternal sunset and surface temperatures hot enough to cook pizza in seconds, no reservation required. Somewhere, an influencer's trying to take a selfie here and wondering why their camera just liquefied. As the light shifts, you think about how deeply connected these twin worlds still are. Venus's brightness helps Earth's astronomers track changes in our own atmosphere. Its thick clouds show how runaway feedback loops can spiral out of control. In a strange way, Venus became the warning label on Earth's bottle, a mirror showing what happens when heat wins the long game. That mirror doesn't just reflect science, it reflects hubris. The idea that our world can never change, never fall out of balance, feels suddenly fragile. You drift downward again, the air tightening around you. The sound of your own breathing becomes rhythmic, hypnotic, blending with the background hum of Venus's winds. There's comfort in the repetition, like waves breaking on a distant shore. Only here, the waves are invisible and made of air dense enough to swim through. If you could reach out, your fingers might meet resistance, like dipping into thick cream. The illusion is pleasant, even if the reality outside would peel your skin away in seconds. A curious historical footnote bubbles up through your memory. Long before telescopes, the Mayans tracked Venus with astonishing precision, timing their rituals to its 584-day cycle of appearances. They saw it as both destroyer and rebirth, a duality reflecting the planet's beauty and fury. Even now, the dual image remains, the morning star that heralds light and the evening star that closes the day. You can almost feel those ancient eyes watching the same glow you're descending through, whispering myths about gods who fell from heaven and rose again. You smile faintly. Humans have always projected their stories into the sky. Love, loss, rebirth, revenge and wunsch, all mapped onto these wandering dots of light. Venus, of course, became the symbol of beauty, temptation and desire. And maybe there's a poetic symmetry in discovering that beneath her veil lies a storm so fierce it erases all illusion. Beauty, after all, often hides fire underneath. The cloud deck thickens again, swallowing the light until everything turns a dim, gold grey. You're floating through timelessness now, no sky above, no ground below, just layers of gas older than human memory. The air around you glows faintly from scattered sunlight, and you sense for a fleeting moment that you're not falling at all but drifting sideways through time. Two sister planets, once nearly identical, now worlds apart, one blue, one burning, and you suspended between them carrying their shared heartbeat in your chest. The deeper you drift, the darker the light becomes. The clouds above you flatten into thick, swirling bands that ripple like molten silk. Every meter down brings a subtle rise in temperature, a tightening in the invisible air around you. Venus doesn't just warm you, it presses against you, embraces you in a grip that grows heavier with every breath you don't need to take. Somewhere in the middle layers, the temperature has already climbed past 100 degrees Celsius, enough to boil water instantly. And yet, for billions of years, the planet has balanced this furnace-like existence with a strange serenity. Nothing rushes here. The winds howl at the edges, but the planet itself spins so slowly that a single day stretches longer than 200 Earth days. You can almost feel that lethargy in the air, a heat-induced laziness that seeps into your bones. This is where the story of Venus takes its sharpest turn. Once, it might have been temperate. Oceans shimmered, rain fell softly, and sunlight filtered through wispy clouds. Then something happened. The greenhouse effect, a term that sounds innocent enough, took control. Carbon dioxide, that modest invisible gas, began to accumulate faster than it could escape. The planet absorbed sunlight but couldn't let it back out. Heat built upon heat, trapped by the very air that once kept it mild. The oceans, faced with that slow fever, began to evaporate. Water vapor itself is a greenhouse gas, so the more that evaporated, the faster the heating went, a self-feeding loop spiralling toward catastrophe. You can almost picture it. Seas turning to steam, clouds thickening, thunder rolling across a dying sky. In time, the last droplets boiled away, and the oceans disappeared entirely, leaving nothing but cracked basins that hardened into volcanic plains. Historians still argue whether Venus's oceans lasted 1 billion years or barely 100 million, whether the tipping point came gradually or all at once. Either way, by the time the planet stabilized, it had become a mirror world gone wrong, a permanent warning hanging in the twilight of the inner solar system. The numbers are brutal: surface temperatures around 465 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead, atmospheric pressure 90 times that of Earth's. You imagine standing there for a single second, just enough to have your spacesuit crushed flat, then dissolved by acid mist. Not a good vacation spot, unless you're a lava enthusiast or a stainless steel masochist. And yet, in its own hostile way, Venus remains breathtaking. The entire planet glows faintly from reflected sunlight, a soft aura that turns night into a permanent amber dusk. It's hard to reconcile that ethereal beauty with the chaos beneath. A whisper of a fringe theory slides into your thoughts, one of those scientific what-ifs that teeter between brilliant and absurd. Some researchers once wondered if the runaway greenhouse might have been triggered by ancient supervolcanoes, their eruptions feeding carbon dioxide into the air faster than the crust could absorb it. Others speculate that massive asteroid impacts kicked the process off by vaporizing oceans in sudden bursts. Historians of geology still argue whether Venus's catastrophe was self-inflicted by its own volcanic cycles, or just bad luck in cosmic timing. Either way, the effect was permanent. Venus became locked in a loop that would never end. You glance toward the dim glow far below, where the heat blurs even your imagination. The pressure there is equivalent to being nearly a kilometre under Earth's oceans. Every atom of air presses down like a liquid weight. And yet, that atmosphere is the reason we can study the planet at all. It reflects radar signals beautifully, allowing us to map the surface through layers of cloud. NASA's Magellan mission in the 1990s did exactly that, sending radar pulses that pierced the haze and bounced back, revealing a world of volcanoes, ridges, and vast plains. From orbit, it looked eerily smooth, like the planet had been melted and reshaped all at once. You think about how fragile balance really is. On Earth, we talk about climate change as if it's something new, something manageable. Venus is what happens when the thermostat jams on high. There's a dark humour in imagining a cosmic repairman showing up late. Sorry, the warranty expired about 2 billion years ago. You chuckle softly, the sound fading into the dense hum of the atmosphere. The deeper layers glow faintly orange now. The light doesn't scatter anymore. It burns. In your mind, you can almost feel the heat radiating up through your boots. The air is thick enough to slow your fall, making every movement sluggish. It's like swimming through invisible honey, while a furnace roars around you. The wind that once screamed past has weakened here, choked by density. Only slow convection currents remain, massive, sluggish columns of hot gas rising and sinking like the breath of a sleeping giant. A small fact drifts by, easy to miss but strangely poetic. Venus shines so brightly from Earth because its clouds reflect about 75% of incoming sunlight. It's the most reflective planet in our solar system, a perfect disguise. From afar, she glitters with serenity. Up close, she seethes. There's something oddly human in that contradiction. How beauty can hide fury, how warmth can become suffocation. The air pressure grows heavier in your chest, meld. Not real, but your imagination filling in the sensation. You let it press you down gently, the way weighted blankets ease restless sleepers. The sound of your own pulse mixes with the planet's rhythm, a deep, slow rumble that feels like it's been going on forever. For a moment, you forget that you're just a visitor. You feel like part of it, like a molecule drifting in a planet's exhale. The last of the sunlight flickers behind the clouds, and you realize that on Venus, sunrise and sunset are not gentle transitions but acts of war between light and heat. Even the concept of day and night loses meaning here. The thick air scatters sunlight so thoroughly that the ground never truly sees darkness. It's always twilight on Venus, Eternal evening, eternal burn. Somewhere in that endless dusk, you feel a quiet kind of awe. Maybe this is what every world carries inside it, a story of balance tipped, a lesson written in rock and air. Venus didn't die, it just changed into something else, something too intense for us to love up close. And yet, in a cosmic sense, she still whispers to her sister across the void, reminding Earth what not to become. You breathe out slowly, or imagine that you do, letting the thought drift upward like a faint puff of steam. The runaway greenhouse isn't just a scientific process, it's a planetary memory, and you're floating through it now, weightless, listening to the echoes of a world that once had oceans and lost them to its own reflection. You keep descending, and with every passing meter the air becomes thicker, heavier, and somehow older. You can almost feel time itself slow down here. The sunlight has faded to a dusky, burnt orange glow that never quite brightens or darkens. It just lingers, like a memory that refuses to end. You are now inside the lowest layers of Venus's atmosphere, the place where every spacecraft has come to die. The temperature outside your cocoon is around 460 degrees Celsius, the kind of heat that laughs at the idea of metal. The pressure is 90 times that of Earth's surface, like standing beneath a kilometre of ocean. The air doesn't just surround you, it crushes you, an invisible ocean of carbon dioxide with the consistency of syrup. You glance to your left, and for a flicker of imagination, you see the ghost of a probe, Soviet steel, battered and melting. The Venera missions were the first to touch this hellish surface, brave little mechanical emissaries that lasted only minutes before the planet swallowed them. Venera 7 in E70 was the first human-made object to transmit data from another planet's surface. It survived for a grand total of 23 minutes before its circuits fried. That's about as long as one good nap, which seems fitting. Even asleep, you'd last about as long here as a Soviet lander. You can't help but smile at that. The deeper layers of the atmosphere are almost opaque. It's like swimming through orange fog lit from within by molten ground. The sound, if you could hear it, would be a constant low hiss, the roar of dense gases sliding over rock and metal. The air molecules vibrate so tightly that sound travels faster here than on Earth, but it would be muffled, smothered by heat. Every spacecraft microphone that's ever listened down here has heard only static, like a cosmic frying pan. Historians of planetary science still argue whether Venus ever had what we'd call surface weather. With no oceans, there's no rain as we know it, but the sulfuric acid droplets from higher clouds sometimes fall partway down before evaporating in the scorching heat. It rains technically, but the rain never lands. Somewhere around 50 kilometers up, the droplets sizzle into gas, vanishing before they ever touch the ground. You watch that chemical ballet in your mind, acid tears dissolving mid-air, and realize this world weeps but never lets its sorrow reach the surface. The ground finally emerges below you, an endless expanse of cracked plains and softly rising ridges lit in dull amber light. The rocks look molten even though they've cooled long ago. You land softly, your weight spread evenly in this thick air, as though gravity itself is cushioned by the density around you. The soil beneath your imaginary boots is made of basalt, a volcanic rock familiar to Earth. You bend down and scoop some up. It's gritty, dark, and still radiates heat. Some parts of the planet's surface are thought to be relatively young, maybe only a few 100 million years old. That's suspiciously recent in planetary terms, which makes scientists wonder whether Venus still reshapes itself from time to time, melting and resurfacing under the crush of its own atmosphere. A faint shudder passes through the ground beneath you. It could be the planet breathing, or the echo of something deep, a geological murmur that's been happening since before Earth had continents. Some researchers believe Venus periodically undergoes global resurfacing, where the entire crust melts, spreads, and solidifies again over tens of millions of years. No tectonic plates, no slow drift, just total renewal in a single, catastrophic wave. Historians still debate whether that process is ongoing, or whether the last great resurfacing left Venus in a kind of permanent pause. Either way, the idea that the entire planet can shed its skin like a snake, erasing all trace of its past, feels both terrifying and elegant. You take a slow walk across the plains. The air is so dense that your movements leave invisible wakes behind you, the way a boat cuts through water. Far in the distance, faint shadows of mountains rise through the haze. Maxwell Montes, the tallest range on Venus, higher even than Mount Everest. They shimmer as if behind glass, their peaks reflecting radar waves instead of sunlight. You imagine trudging toward them, though trudging here feels more like pushing through hot pudding. Every step is effort, every thought a little sluggish. It's strange to think that all this pressure, the immense weight of the air, is the same force that keeps Venus's atmosphere from escaping into space. The same thing that kills probes also preserves them in a way. Once a lander collapses here, it never drifts away. It just stays, fossilized in heat, as though the planet collects each one lovingly. Somewhere under that glowing haze, 7 Soviet probes and 1 American one lie silent, their metal frames half buried in volcanic dust. A weird sort of museum, you think. A museum where the exhibits melt upon arrival. You take another look upward. The sky is not blue, not grey, not even really a sky, just a ceiling of fire-coloured mist. The sunlight that filters through is dim and heavy, the kind of light that makes every shadow look soft-edged. You imagine the heat vibrating through your suit, the air around you alive with motion. If there were any wind left down here, it would be sluggish, more like the movement of liquid than air. Venus doesn't whisper at ground level, it suffocates quietly. A small, almost comical thought crosses your mind. If you tried to fry an egg here, the pan would melt first. It's not much of a joke, but it's hard not to laugh at how absurdly unlivable this place is. And yet, there's beauty in its consistency. Venus doesn't hide its nature. It is what it is, unapologetically hostile. There's something admirable about that. No pretending, no pretense of balance, just full commitment to being the solar system's drama queen. Your thoughts wander to a historical tidbit that always amuses astronomers. For a long time, scientists believed Venus might be covered in lush jungles beneath its clouds. Early 20th century books imagined steamy rainforests and swamps filled with alien creatures. They assumed the thick atmosphere meant warmth, moisture, and life. Turns out they got 1 out of 3 right. The warmth, yes, but the moisture's acid, and the life? Still an open question. That scientific optimism, though, says something sweet about human imagination. We want the unknown to be friendly. We expect paradise where there's only pressure. You kneel again, placing your hand against the glowing ground, and the heat pulses back like a heartbeat. It's hard to tell whether the sound you feel is real or just in your head. The planet hums with ancient energy, relentless and slow. Every element here, sulfur, iron, carbon, exists in a constant cycle of breaking and bonding, forming a chemistry of permanence and destruction. It's so extreme and so absolute that it almost becomes peaceful. For a moment, you let your eyes close. The orange glow seeps through your lids, painting your thoughts gold. Above you, the clouds churn endlessly, a thick ocean suspended in the sky. You realize that everything on Venus, from air to rock, exists under tension, pressing, burning, dissolving, reforming, and somehow it endures. There's a lesson in that endurance, though it comes dressed in fire. You lift your head from that trembling ground, and for a moment you imagine what it might be like to float above all this, high in the temperate middle atmosphere where pressure and temperature feel almost familiar. Up there, about 55 kilometers above the surface, lies a zone scientists have quietly fallen in love with. The layer of perpetual twilight where humans could, in theory, survive inside floating habitats. You picture it now, soft silver blimps drifting through sulfuric mist, windows glowing faintly against an amber sky. The idea seems absurd at first. Who'd choose to live above a world that melts titanium? But then again, humanity has a knack for turning impossible into temporary inconvenience. In that middle layer, the temperature lingers around 30 degrees Celsius, and the pressure roughly matches sea level on Earth. The air outside would still be toxic, carbon dioxide thickened with droplets of sulfuric acid. But those droplets are small, about a micron across, and they scatter light beautifully. If you built cities there, they'd always be bathed in a permanent sunset glowing gold and ivory against the clouds. NASA once proposed this idea, HAVOC, the high-altitude Venus operational concept. Floating airships powered by sunlight, their helium-filled chambers pushing against the crushing atmosphere below. It's the kind of plan that sounds half science, half poetry, and you can't help but imagine yourself aboard one. You drift upward in your mind, rising through haze that brightens from bronze to pale cream. The pressure lightens, the heat fades. Somewhere around you, droplets of sulfuric acid hiss against your imagined hull, pattering like invisible rain. The sound is strangely soothing, like soft static on an old radio. You could almost sleep to it. There's something calming about this altitude. Too high for the inferno, too low for the radiation of space. It's a Goldilocks layer made entirely of acid and irony. From a window in your hypothetical airship, Venus's horizon curves in endless gold. The cloud tops ripple and twist, shaped by winds so fast they circle the planet in just 4 days. Below, the world is hidden completely. Above, the light of the sun blazes, filtered through mist until it looks more like melted copper than fire. You wonder what life would feel like here? If one could step onto a transparent platform and simply float forever, caught between two worlds. A quirk of physics makes this dream oddly plausible. On Venus, breathable air, a mix of nitrogen and oxygen, is actually lighter than the planet's carbon dioxide atmosphere. If you filled a balloon with Earth-like air, it would rise naturally, floating without helium. Imagine that. The very air you breathe could be your buoyancy. Entire cities could hang effortlessly in the sky, powered by the chemistry of survival itself. Historians of engineering still argue whether this concept is science fiction or future blueprint, but for now it lives in that delightful space between both. You can't help smiling at the thought of Venusian tourism. Couples sipping tea in glass domes above acid clouds, influencers filming sunrise through orange mist, somebody complaining about the sulfur smell on their vlog. You'd laugh if your lungs weren't imaginary. Even so, the image sticks with you, humanity clinging to the most unwelcoming places simply because they're there. We're a species that looks at a literal death planet and says, maybe just one hotel. Through the swirling haze, you see lightning flash, a bright violet pulse that lights the sky for an instant. Whether it's real lightning or just electrical discharge is still debated. Instruments have caught bursts of radio noise and brief optical flashes, but Venus keeps her secrets. The electrical energy up here is immense, charged by friction between cloud layers. You can almost feel the static tingling across your skin. The airship's sensors flicker, translating atmospheric chaos into flickering graphs. Somewhere deep below, the ground still roils with volcanic heat. It's strange to think that this placid sky and that molten landscape belong to the same world. Venus is contradiction embodied, a heaven layered directly over hell. Maybe that's what draws us to it. The idea that beauty and destruction can coexist, inseparable, forever turning around the same sun. You glide farther through the clouds, and the acid rain thickens into faint streaks that burn white against the golden skin. If you could step outside, your suit would hiss as microdroplets ate through the outer layer. Yet oddly enough, the air smells faintly sweet. Scientists believe trace chemicals like sulfur dioxide and carbonyl sulfide might create an aroma reminiscent of burnt sugar and matches. You almost laugh at the idea of Venus having a scent. Imagine describing it in a perfume ad. Venus mist. Notes of brimstone, graphite, and regret. You lean against the glass of your imaginary habitat, and the view stretches into infinite pastel haze. It's easy to forget how deadly it is out there. The soft light lulls you into comfort. That's the danger of Venus, you realize. Not just physical, but psychological. From orbit, it looks calm, alluring like a candle flame trapped in glass. But everything about it is deceptive. Even the brightness that makes it the evening star is just reflection from poison clouds. Still, humans have never been good at resisting the beautiful things that could kill us. A historical tangent flickers through your thoughts. In the 1970s, long before Havoc, engineers at NASA's Ames Research Center proposed aerostat observatories for Venus, balloons carrying instruments through the middle atmosphere. In 1985, the Soviet Vega missions actually made it happen. 2 small balloons, each about 3 meters wide, drifted through these very skies for almost 2 days, transmitting data back to Earth. They rode the high winds, dipped through the mists, and sent home readings of pressure and temperature before their batteries died. For 46 hours, humanity truly floated above Venus. The last signals faded into static as the balloons drifted into night, but for a moment, we touched serenity above chaos. Historians still argue whether those brief flights were the first real cities on another world. They were tiny, fragile, and temporary, but they existed. The idea that machines could hover inside a storm no human could survive feels like a metaphor for exploration itself. You imagine the silent descent of those balloons, their metal skins glistening with acid rain, drifting into the deeper gold until they vanished. Somewhere down there, maybe fragments remain, ghosts of the first sky travelers of Venus. A gust of turbulence shakes your imaginary craft. You steady yourself, peering through the window one last time. The sunlight bends around the curve of the planet, turning the clouds below into a glowing ocean. For a fleeting second, you imagine life in those depths, not human, not even recognizable, but microscopic and persistent. If anything could survive here, it would live in this layer, floating like spores in a golden soup. You make a mental note to come back to that thought later. For now, the image of floating cities is enough. You recline into the cushioned silence of your capsule, the hum of turbines barely audible. The sky outside swells with light and shadow, ever-changing, endless. For a place built entirely from acid and fire, Venus has a strange kind of peace about it. Maybe that's the secret. It teaches you that even in the most hostile spaces, balance can exist for a while. You close your eyes and let that thought settle as the clouds drift past in slow, eternal motion. The clouds begin to thin as you drift along their upper edges, and for the first time something solid gleams through the golden blur below. Not rock exactly, more like a radar shadow of a world that refuses to be seen by human eyes. You're hovering in the invisible gaze of Magellan now, NASA's ambitious orbiter that once peeled back Venus's veil with microwaves instead of light. Between 1990 and 1994, the Magellan spacecraft mapped 98% of the planet's surface, sending back images so detailed that geologists could trace the scars of mountains, valleys, and ancient lava flows. You imagine standing inside one of those radar mosaics, every contour around you painted in shades of grey and gold like a ghostly landscape printed in heat. Magellan didn't see with eyes, but with echoes. It sent radar pulses through the thick atmosphere, listened for the faintest return, and stitched those signals into a world map. What it found was astonishing. Vast plains broken by immense ridges, twisted domes, and volcanic rises the size of continents. One area, Aphrodite Terra, sprawls across the equator, as large as Africa. Another, Ishtar Terra, lies near the North Pole, crowned by the Maxwell Montes Range, the tallest mountains on the planet. From orbit, the whole world looks like a frozen sea of melted rock, a planet caught in the act of becoming something new. Historians of space exploration still argue whether Magellan's mission was a turning point in our understanding of Venus, or merely a prelude to deeper mystery. Its radar could pierce clouds, yes, but it could not see colour, could not measure composition directly, could not tell whether the volcanoes it mapped were ancient or still rumbling beneath the haze. Still, it gave us something humanity had never truly had before. A face for Venus, and that face was covered in scars. You imagine walking across those highlands, endless ridges curving like the folds of skin on some ancient sleeping creature. The ground would feel alien beneath your feet, every rock half melted and coated with a layer of iron dust. In some areas, radar reflectivity suggested metal frost, and yes, frost made of lead sulfide, that might condense on mountaintops like snow. It's hard not to laugh at the thought. Venus, where it's so hot that the peaks might sparkle with metallic snow. Somewhere, a meteorologist's career implodes under the irony. There's a rhythmic hum in the air, a memory of the radar pulses still echoing through the planet's thick blanket. You let it vibrate through your bones, the way sound hums in a subway tunnel. It's comforting, almost musical, as if the planet is still whispering the data Magellan sent home decades ago. Each pulse becomes a story of valleys named for goddesses, craters named for heroines, volcanoes named for mythic queens. Unlike other planets, Venus's surface features are named almost entirely after women, a quiet tribute to the goddess whose name it bears. There's something poetic about that, a subtle nod across cultures and centuries. A light joke crosses your mind. If the naming rules ever expand, someone will eventually propose Mount Beyoncé. You grin, imagining future scientists debating whether a volcanic dome deserves pop cultural reverence. Then again, Venus has always been about dualities, beauty and destruction, elegance and extremity. so maybe that's exactly the kind of absurdity she deserves. The Magellan maps revealed another strange pattern. Few impact craters. On most planets, craters accumulate over time, layering like wrinkles that mark age. But on Venus, there are only about 1,000 of them, too few for a world billions of years old. The even distribution suggests the surface was completely resurfaced relatively recently, perhaps 500 million years ago. The planet seems to have melted itself down and started over, erasing almost everything older than the dinosaurs. Historians still argue whether that global cleansing happened all at once or whether Venus renews herself gradually in volcanic spasms that never stop entirely. Either way, she's the ultimate minimalist. When in doubt, delete everything and begin again. You zoom in, your mind tracing the radar outlines of an immense circular feature called Artemis Corona. It's over 2,000 kilometers wide, the largest known volcanic structure in the solar system, a ring of fractured crust surrounding a vast depression that may once have been filled with lava. Some scientists think it formed as Venus's mantle pushed upward, then sank back, creating a gigantic geological heartbeat. You imagine standing at its edge, watching molten rock breathe beneath the crust like a living creature trying to wake from deep sleep. And then there are the tesserae, twisted, interlocking regions of ridges and valleys that look like scales or crushed origami. These are among the oldest terrains on the planet, ancient fragments that survived the last great resurfacing. Walking through them in your mind feels like crossing the ruins of another world, sharp ridges glowing faintly from trapped heat, each step echoing through geological time. If Venus ever had continents, these might be their remnants. Historians still debate that too, whether the tesserae record a vanished era of plate movement or something entirely alien, a form of crustal warping unique to this planet. A faint rumble draws your attention upward, where lightning flickers across the clouds. You remember how the Magellan team used those same flashes to calibrate instruments, measuring how energy moved between atmosphere and ground. Every bolt that struck the clouds became both data and mystery, a reminder that even Bell radar has limits when it faces a planet that seems to absorb and distort every signal. You take a step forward on this imagined surface and the heat ripples around you. Magellan's radar data may have shown stability, but beneath that apparent calm, Venus is restless. Even today, orbiters detect subtle infrared emissions that hint at volcanic activity, heat signatures that could mean lava still flows somewhere under the haze. The thought makes your heart quicken. You're standing on a world that might still breathe fire. You crouch and press your hand against the shimmering ground. The basalt hums faintly, vibrating with ancient energy. This is the language Magellan decoded. Pressure waves, heat echoes, mineral reflections, all stitched into a portrait of a planet both dead and alive. It's almost funny you think of how we keep trying to see Venus clearly when she insists on hiding behind layers of disguise. Maybe that's her secret, her defense against curiosity. She lets you look, but only through glass, through cloud, through echo. A random fact pops into your head. When the mission ended in '94, Magellan was deliberately plunged into the Venusian atmosphere to collect data until it burned and melted, becoming part of the planet it studied. There's a quiet poetry in that ending, the observer joining the observed, the explorer dissolving into its own discovery. You imagine that final descent, the spacecraft glowing red, its last radio whisper fading into static. Somewhere down below, maybe near Artemis Corona or the plains of Aphrodite, a few particles of Magellan still rest in the dust. You stand there a moment longer, letting the thoughts settle. The radar hum fades. The clouds above thicken again, closing the view like curtains drawn after a play. Venus's hidden face slips away, secretive and knowing, as if she's aware you've seen just enough to keep wondering. You can't help but smile, because that's exactly how she wants it. You keep walking, or at least imagining that you are, across the molten plains Magellan once revealed. The air presses in like a physical weight, every movement slow and syrupy. Around you, the light flickers orange and gold, not because of sunset, but because the atmosphere itself glows faintly from heat and scattered light. Somewhere beneath your feet, the crust grumbles. Venus has always been the drama queen of geology, its surface shaped not by gentle erosion or drifting plates, but by volcanic furies, and scientists believe the planet may have more volcanoes than any other in the solar system. Tens of thousands of them dot the landscape, from tiny domes to sprawling mountains hundreds of kilometers wide. You imagine standing on the flank of one, watching rivers of molten rock shimmer in the haze, as if the planet's blood is too restless to stay hidden. The most famous of these fiery giants is Mons, towering almost 9 kilometers high, nearly the height of Mount Everest, but built entirely of lava flows and collapsed calderas. It dominates the region called Atla Regio, surrounded by smaller volcanoes that look like frozen whirlpools. You can almost see the terrain rippling outward, solidified waves of basalt spreading like the ripples of a stone dropped into molten glass. Venus's volcanoes don't erupt with explosive violence like those on Earth. The thick air smothers the blasts, turning them into slow, suffocating exhalations of lava. The effect is more suffocating than cinematic, a planet endlessly sighing molten rock instead of roaring it. You kneel and press your hand against the imaginary ground, feeling that faint vibration again, the pulse of heat rising from below. In 2023, scientists poring over old Magellan data noticed something remarkable. A volcanic vent near Mons had changed shape between images taken 8 months apart. The circular pit had expanded and appeared to fill with lava. It was, in all likelihood, the first direct evidence of an active eruption on Venus. After decades of speculation, the planet had finally blinked at us through its clouded mask. You grin at the thought. After centuries of pshiness, Venus finally said, "Yes, I'm still alive." Historians still argue whether Venus is a planet perpetually erupting in slow motion, or one that goes quiet for ages and then explodes in bursts of catastrophic renewal. Either scenario is unsettling. On Earth, volcanic gases eventually settle into oceans or forests. On Venus, they have nowhere to go. Every eruption pumps more carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the already choked atmosphere, feeding the greenhouse engine that never turns off. You can almost imagine the cycle. The planet exhales heat, and in doing so cooks itself a little more each time. There's a strange beauty in that destructive repetition. You picture Venus not as dead, but as meditating in lava, constantly reshaping its own face. Some parts of the surface, like the massive plains of Lavinia Planitia, look like oceans of basalt frozen mid-wave. Others are speckled with odd volcanic domes that resemble pancakes, flat, broad discs stacked one on top of another. These pancake domes, as geologists charmingly call them, are unique to Venus. They may have formed from thick, sticky lava that oozed out slowly and spread just far enough before solidifying. You can't help but smile. Even Venus's geological cuisine has flair. The air grows hotter around you, shimmering like a mirage. You imagine faint tremors underfoot, though on Venus quakes might move more sluggishly than on Earth, dampened by heat and pressure. Somewhere far away, a chain of volcanoes called the Melita Fluctus stretches across the horizon. The name means flow of a Melita, after an ancient goddess of fertility. There's something fitting about that, lava as life, molten birth in an otherwise barren world. You stand there for a long moment, letting that symbolism sink in. A quick aside drifts through your mind. In the 1970s, some Soviet scientists speculated that the constant heat from volcanic flows might make Venus's surface self-sterilizing, that no organic molecule could ever survive long enough to evolve. Later researchers challenged that idea, suggesting that life, if it ever existed, might have retreated into the upper atmosphere instead. Historians still debate whether the surface was ever cool enough for biology to gain a foothold before the planet's fever consumed it. Either way, it's comforting in a strange way to think that Venus, despite everything, may still be a little bit alive. You look up through the glowing haze and imagine what the sky might look like from the ground. The sun would appear as a faint orange glow diffused across the clouds, barely distinguishable from the rest of the sky. You'd never see stars, never see night. The horizon would blur into the air itself, all distance and texture erased. It would be like living inside a furnace that forgot it was supposed to end somewhere. And yet even here you find a kind of peace. The uniformity, the stillness between eruptions, the endless golden twilight, it's hypnotic. You imagine setting up a small camp beside one of the pancake domes. Your imaginary suit whirs faintly, keeping your mind safe from a temperature that could melt lead. The surface rocks glow faintly, heat radiating upward in visible waves. You remember that the Venera probes once sent back black and white images from this level, a rocky plain scattered with flat slabs and oddly rounded stones. Some looked almost like river cobbles, smooth and polished, as if shaped by an ancient flow of water. Historians still argue whether those shapes are coincidence or the fossilized memory of streams that existed billions of years ago. You can almost picture those lost rivers winding between volcanoes, carving shallow channels before drying into vapor. If you squint, maybe the faint depressions that crisscross the plains aren't all lava flows. Maybe some are ghosts of water long gone. It's a fragile thought, but it lingers like the scent of rain in a place that hasn't seen rain in eons. A flicker of movement catches your eye. Imaginary, of course, but you pretend it's real. A shimmer above a distant ridge, heat waves pulsing like breath. For a moment, you convince yourself the volcano's awake again, that somewhere down there magma is pushing upward, reminding you that this world never truly rests. You grin and whisper, "Easy girl," as if the planet can hear you. It's a ridiculous thing to do, but on Venus, where the air itself can crush submarines, talking to the landscape seems reasonable enough. You take one last look across the plain, your vision rippling in the heat, and realize how rare this stillness is. For billions of years, Venus has boiled, cracked, melted, and reformed. And yet right now, at least in this moment of imagination, it's quiet, no thunder, no wind, just heat and history. You breathe in, letting that molten calm settle in your mind. This isn't destruction, it's transformation. The volcanoes here don't end things, they reset them. Every eruption wipes away the old and makes room for the next attempt. As the horizon blurs again into gold and darkness, you start to rise. The air thickens around you, lifting you gently as though the planet itself is exhaling one long, slow sigh. The volcanoes shrink beneath you, their shapes dissolving back into mist. Somewhere in that haze, new fire is already forming, unseen but inevitable. You smile at the thought. Venus doesn't just survive, she reheats eternity. As you float higher through the bronze haze, the heat thins just enough for thought to gather again. Below, the volcanoes fade into a dim, glowing sea. Above, the clouds begin to knit together, luminous and unbroken. Somewhere in that molten silence, you sense the bones of the planet, massive, rigid, and strangely still. Earth's crust constantly rearranges itself, continents drifting like lazy puzzle pieces over oceans of magma. But Venus, she holds still. No shifting plates, no subduction zones, no continents colliding or drifting apart. Her surface is one continuous shell, a pressure cooker with no release valve. And that stillness, more than the heat or the acid, may be what makes her so alien. You imagine running your hand along the invisible boundary where two tectonic plates should meet, but there's nothing there. Just rock, fused to rock, welded by time and temperature. Historians of geology still argue whether Venus ever had plate tectonics in her youth. Some models suggest that when the planet was young and its mantle still cooling, it might have moved like Earth's, plates gliding, crust recycling, volcanoes blooming along edges. But as the heat built, the crust thickened, solidifying into one impenetrable shell. Once that happened, the planet's internal energy had nowhere to go but upward, building until the whole surface buckled in slow, catastrophic waves. It's the planetary equivalent of holding your breath for a few billion years. Beneath you stretches an endless field of fractures, ancient scars left by those global convulsions. They run in great arcs and tangles, some forming hexagonal networks that span thousands of kilometers. On Earth, these would mark rifts or mountain chains. Here, they're neither. They're the record of a planet that cracked but never broke. You hover above one of them now, the chasm faintly glowing from residual heat. The air wavers, and the illusion makes the ground look like liquid marble. You can almost hear it creak, a low groan echoing through the rock, like the sound of metal cooling. A quirky thought surfaces. Venus, the planet without plate tectonics, is like a bakery with no vents. Everything that should have escaped over time built up instead, swelling and bubbling beneath the crust until the oven door finally burst. The global resurfacing theory suggests that roughly every 500 million years, the planet essentially melts its entire outer layer, letting the pressure out in one colossal exhale of lava. Imagine that, Continents dissolving in hours, mountains flattening, the world renewing itself in an infernal baptism. Even apocalypse seems to run on a schedule here. You drift lower again, just enough to see a sprawling network of ridges known as the ridge belts. They crisscross the plains like veins beneath golden skin. These ridges rise where the crust compressed under its own heat, pushing upward like wrinkles forming on cooling clay. It's a delicate paradox. Venus's surface looks smooth from space, yet up close it's a labyrinth of twisted folds. You step forward and touch one of the ridges. The rock radiates faint warmth, like the skin of something still alive. The idea isn't far-fetched. Some scientists propose that Venus's interior remains as restless as Earth's, only trapped, suppressed under that unyielding crust. Historians still debate whether this frozen rigidity was inevitable or the result of bad luck. Maybe Venus cooled too quickly after formation. Maybe its rotation, so slow it barely turns, kept its core from churning up enough to drive tectonics. On Earth, the moving plates act like a planetary thermostat, recycling carbon dioxide and stabilizing the climate over eons. Without that release, Venus's carbon just kept piling up in the air until the greenhouse effect spiraled out of control. It's a grim cosmic lesson. Stability isn't always safety. Sometimes movement is survival. You pause on a rise, squinting through the heavy glow. To the east lies a feature called Ovda Radio, one of the oldest and most contorted regions on the planet. The ground there twists and folds like a crumpled bedsheet frozen mid-flutter. Some researchers call it the continent that never was, a relic of early tectonics perhaps, or simply the scar of internal stress relieved unevenly. You try to imagine what it would have looked like during its formation. Molten crust buckling upward, the air filled with glowing dust, the planet groaning under its own reshaping. The sound alone would have been like an orchestra of thunder trapped under rock. A small, mischievous part of your brain wonders whether Venus resents her stillness. If she had a voice, maybe she'd whisper, "You move too much, Earth." Maybe she'd boast about her endurance, her ability to hold shape through unthinkable heat. Then again, maybe she's jealous of motion, of oceans flowing, of mountains migrating through time. It's funny to think about worlds with personalities, but on a long enough timescale they almost seem to have them. Venus is stubborn, Earth is restless, Mars is lonely. A cosmic family portrait where everyone learned to cope in their own geological way. The air thickens again, pressing softly on your shoulders. You look upward, watching faint lightning flash between cloud layers, and for a second you imagine it as the planet's nervous system firing. Maybe those electrical bursts are how Venus relieves tension, little crackles of static instead of tectonic shifts. On Earth, stress breaks continents. Here, it lights the sky. Different therapy, same purpose. You remember reading how radar studies once hinted at patterns of deformation across the plains, ridges and troughs arranged like the wrinkles on a raisin. One researcher compared it to watching a planet try not to explode. That image sticks with you now. Venus constantly flexing and compressing, endlessly trying to contain her own internal heat. It's an act of restraint on a planetary scale, the slowest, hottest yoga session imaginable. You glance down again at the fissure beneath your feet. It extends beyond sight, tapering into haze. For a fleeting moment, you imagine it opening, just slightly, releasing a whisper of gas. The air shimmers brighter, and for a second you think you see motion. Lava creeping upward, red gold and patient. But it's only a trick of the heat, a mirage born of exhaustion and imagination. Still, it's hard not to believe that the planet's heartbeat continues beneath you, steady and unbroken. A joke bubbles up. You could call Venus the introvert planet. While Earth keeps recycling herself, chatting with oceans and volcanoes and tectonic shifts, Venus prefers solitude, keeping everything bottled up until the next meltdown. It's oddly relatable. You chuckle under your breath, the sound muffled by the dense imaginary air. As you rise again, the fractures fade into a seamless expanse of mist. The surface disappears beneath its shroud and only the memory of pressure remains. You think about that stillness, the paradox of a world so violently shaped by forces we can't see, yet appearing utterly calm from above. Maybe that's the final illusion of Venus. Beneath the still, golden clouds lies a world that never truly rests, just waits. The planet holds its breath, dreaming of the next time it will burn itself clean. You begin to drift again. rising into the paler bands of the upper atmosphere where the light grows strange, half golden, half pale green. The winds here are faster, whipping around the planet at more than 300 kilometers per hour. A hurricane wrapped around the equator of an entire world. You let it push you sideways, gliding above the clouds like a stray ember in a storm. Below, Venus turns lazily in the opposite direction of almost everything else in the solar system. Her spin is backward, retrograde, and that simple inversion changes everything. Her sun rises in the west and sets in the east, though rises and sets barely apply here since the planet's day lasts longer than its year. 243 Earth days for one rotation, but only 225 to circle the sun. You can almost hear the universe sigh at the inefficiency of it all. If you stood on the surface, assuming you could stand, you would see the sun crawl across the sky so slowly that an entire lifetime could pass between dawn and dusk. But up here, where the atmosphere races, the winds give you a kind of borrowed rotation. From the perspective of your floating viewpoint, the world spins faster, an illusion of speed against the sluggish planet below. Historians of astronomy still argue how Venus ended up spinning backward in the first place. Some claim it was born that way, its angular momentum twisted by early collisions. Others think a massive asteroid hit it later, flipping its axis and leaving it to tumble for eons before stabilizing. There's even a theory that its dense atmosphere dragged it backward over time, the sheer friction of air slowing and reversing its rotation like a cosmic brake. Whatever the cause, the result is a planet perpetually confused about the direction of time. You hover there for a while, imagining sunrise from the surface. The thick clouds would glow long before the sun actually appeared, turning the whole sky into molten gold for weeks. Then slowly, a dim disk of light would push through the haze, not bright enough to cast sharp shadows, but powerful enough to heat rock until it glows. A Venusian day would be agony for anyone waiting for night. So you suppose patience is the planet's true virtue. The sun would climb halfway up the sky, pause for months, and finally begin its endless descent into another twilight. By the time it's set, centuries might have passed in your mind. There's something almost meditative in that slowness. On Earth, we race against the clock. On Venus, the clock simply dissolves. Time here feels syrupy, stretched. Even your heartbeat slows to match it. You start to understand why some poets describe Venus as the dream planet, not for romance, but for the way she warps the idea of movement itself. Every second lasts forever. Every glow lingers. It's as though the planet is caught mid-blink and has forgotten how to open her eyes again. A faint mechanical memory stirs. The Venera landers, those Soviet pioneers, had to account for this bizarre rotation when they descended. Because Venus spins so slowly, engineers couldn't rely on the usual navigational cues. Instead, they dropped blindly through the clouds, trusting radar pings and luck to guide them to solid ground. Some landed on slopes, some in plains, one possibly in the shadow of a mountain. Each lasted just long enough to confirm that the world below was everything we feared and more. You imagine one of those landers now, long cooled and fused to the rock, facing a perpetual dawn that never quite arrives. Retrograde motion affects more than just the planet's day. It shapes the very way Venus dances through our sky. From Earth, she alternates between morning star and evening star, never venturing far from the sun's glare. She's the only planet that spins clockwise from our vantage point, which means her clouds, whipped by those super-rotating winds, seem to run contrary to her rotation, a mesmerizing contradiction of movement within movement. You glance down, and the pattern of cloud belts looks like ripples on an enormous marble, all turning in opposing directions yet somehow in harmony. A funny thought bubbles up. You can't help imagining Venus as that friend who insists on walking against the crowd just because everyone else is going the other way. It's petty, rebellious, and weirdly admirable. If planets had personalities, Venus's would be pure defiance. "Oh, you all spin counterclockwise? That's cute. I'll do it my way." You can almost hear the slow, smug turn of her rotation, like someone rolling over in bed and refusing to get up. The wind roars louder now, a constant low-frequency hum that fills the air. Lightning flashes in distant clouds, bright and violet. Some scientists think these electrical storms are powered by friction between the super-fast upper winds and the slower layers below. The atmosphere's enormous energy keeps the entire planet in constant motion, even while the crust beneath barely moves at all. It's a kind of atmospheric tectonics, air replacing rock as the thing that flows and fractures. You wonder whether the planet's backward spin helps sustain this wild circulation, trapping heat in a permanent whirlpool. Historians of planetary dynamics still argue whether Venus's rotation caused the superrotation, or whether it's the other way around. It's the ultimate chicken or egg puzzle on a planetary scale. From your vantage point, the line between day and night, the Terminator, spreads across the world like a golden bruise. You watch it move in slow motion, separating the bright side from the darker half, though dark is a generous word here. Even the night side glows faintly, illuminated by infrared radiation leaking upward from the surface. The entire planet radiates light like a dying ember. You imagine drifting through that dim zone, the quiet side of a perpetual storm, where lightning flickers without sound and the air hums like a living organism. You can't resist the urge to joke. Venus is the solar system's worst roommate. Always hot, never cools off, keeps the lights on all night, and spins in the wrong direction just to prove a point. You let the thought make you smile as you drift along the edge of the cloud tops, feeling the rush of motion around a planet that itself barely moves. A small but poignant historical footnote slips into your mind. In ancient times, before astronomers realized Venus was a single object, some cultures named its two appearances separately. The Babylonians called the morning star Dilbat and the evening star Ninciana, thinking they were different beings chasing each other across the heavens. When they finally realized it was the same world showing two faces, they saw it as a symbol of duality, light and dark, desire and danger. You can almost feel the truth in that now, Venus forever turning backward, forever caught between dawn and dusk, a planet that embodies contradiction itself. You lean back into the wind, letting it carry you westward, the wrong way, but the only way Venus knows. Somewhere far below, the surf-bound surface waits in its endless glowing stillness. Above, the stars remain hidden behind the thick veil. You close your eyes and feel the rotation around you, the world spinning slow and strange. Time stretches, gravity softens, and you realize that backward or not, Venus never stops moving, it just insists on doing it her own way. The air around you grows brighter as you climb higher, and for a moment you forget that beneath the beauty, this is still a planet of poison and heat. The upper atmosphere glows like liquid amber, swirling with ghostly streaks of sulfuric vapor. Every few seconds, a sharp pulse of light flashes through the boundary clouds, lightning or something pretending to be it. Venus has always been an expert at illusions. From Earth, astronomers first reported seeing these flickers more than half a century ago, and ever since, debate has rolled on like the endless thunder that may or may not exist here. You drift toward one of the luminous patches, drawn by the flicker that cuts through the haze like a heartbeat. Lightning on Venus, if it's real, shouldn't exist at all, or at least not easily. The atmosphere is so dense and dry that static discharge struggles to build. On Earth, lightning thrives on the dance between raindrops and ice, positive and negative charges colliding through moisture. But on Venus, there's no water, only acid droplets suspended in carbon dioxide, a far less cooperative conductor. Yet the evidence refuses to die. Soviet Venera probes in the 1970s recorded radio bursts they swore were thunderclaps. Later, the European Venus Express orbiter caught whiffs of electromagnetic spikes that looked suspiciously like the real thing. Historians still argue whether these signals were atmospheric static or genuine bolts slicing through acid rain. Even now, the mystery hums in the clouds like an unresolved chord. You pause mid-drift and watch another pulse of light spread through the mist. It doesn't flash so much as glow, a slow, rolling illumination that expands and fades. Maybe it isn't lightning in the earthly sense, maybe it's something stranger, some exotic kind of chemical discharge born from a world that forgot how to follow our rules. It's comforting in a way to imagine Venus breaking yet another expectation. You can practically hear her whisper, "Oh, you wanted thunderstorms? I'll give you fireworks instead." A streak of violet light arcs across the haze. It's silent, of course. Sound doesn't travel well through such thick air, at least not fast enough to reach you before it's swallowed by the atmosphere. Still, you can almost feel the vibration through your imaginary suit, a faint tremor like distant bass in an ocean of gas. For a brief instant, The flash illuminates the sulfuric clouds around you, and they glow like molten silk, layers upon layers of chemical fog curling through the air. The effect is mesmerizing, hypnotic. You're floating inside an endless light show powered by physics and defiance. Somewhere your mind recalls a quirky bit of trivia. During the 1970s, one astronomer claimed that Venus's lightning might be so frequent that it lights up the night sky continuously, turning darkness into an orange flicker. He called it perpetual twilight lightning. The idea fascinated science fiction writers for decades. Entire novels were set under that unending storm glow. Later measurements, of course, were less dramatic. Venus isn't a disco ball of lightning, just a patient flicker here and there. Still, you like the thought. The idea of a world where even night can't quite extinguish its fire feels appropriately poetic, and historians still debate whether these flashes are atmospheric phenomena or electrical illusions caused by solar wind interacting with the ionosphere. Some suggest they could be static from the planet's fierce winds rubbing particles together, a kind of sandpaper storm in the clouds. If that's true, then the light you're watching isn't lightning at all, but a planetary version of static electricity, scaled up until it glows. You grin at the mental image, an entire planet wrapped in a cosmic sweater, perpetually shocking itself. You tilt your gaze downward. Through the fog, faint shadows move, perhaps your imagination, perhaps the outlines of mountains far below. For a moment, you wonder what it would look like from the ground to stand amid the inferno and watch lightning bloom above the clouds. Would it paint the sky in ghostly colour? Would the air shimmer from electrical heat? On Earth, lightning purifies the atmosphere, splitting molecules, creating ozone. Here, it might do the same, but instead of oxygen, it could forge new sulfur compounds, feeding the acid that falls like poison rain. Venus creates balance even in destruction. Every flash completes a chemical sentence in her endless storm. A sharp crackling sound cuts through your reverie, not thunder, but the whisper of plasma, a reminder that electricity doesn't care about drama when physics is enough. You imagine what the smell would be like, if your nose could survive it. A sharp sting of sulfur and ozone, metallic and sweet. Maybe it's like standing beside a high-voltage wire that smells faintly of burnt sugar. You can almost taste it at the back of your throat, that electric tang of something both alive and deadly. A small laugh escapes you as you think about how many spacecraft have tried to capture this moment. How many delicate instruments melted, shorted or vanished before confirming what your imagination now conjures with ease. The Pioneer Venus orbiter in the late 1970s detected faint optical flashes, but skeptics pointed out that cosmic rays might have fooled its sensors. Later, Venus Express saw similar sparks, and again the argument reignited. Historians still argue whether the debate will ever end, or whether Venus's greatest joy is in keeping her answers just out of reach. You drift upward again, rising through the electric fog until the flashes grow dimmer. The higher you go, the thinner the atmosphere becomes, until you reach a layer where sunlight begins to pierce through. Here, the golden hue fades to pale lemon, then to near white. The contrast between this calm and the storm below feels surreal. You look down at the roiling clouds and realize that even chaos can have rhythm. Lightning here doesn't destroy, it dances. You think of the myths again. Venus, the goddess of beauty, rising from the sea. Only here she rises from storms, from sulfur and fire, from the alchemy of her own atmosphere. The flashes below look almost like the flicker of heartbeat monitors. Steady, glowing, alive. Maybe that's why humans keep sending machines here. Not to conquer, but to listen. To confirm that beneath all the heat and pressure, this world is still pulsing, still evolving. Another thought passes, a quick, dark joke. Venus might be the only planet where getting struck by lightning would be redundant. You'd already be dead long before the bolt arrived. But humour feels necessary here. A way to keep awe from tipping into fear. The clouds roll beneath you again, their slow curls lit intermittently by distant violet arcs. You float quietly, watching each flash bloom and fade, like a heartbeat in slow motion. No thunder, no sound, just light. It's almost peaceful, the way fireflies might look if they decided to colonize a planet. And as you hover there, watching those silent glimmers dance across a world that burns from within, you feel the faintest echo of your own pulse sinking to the rhythm of a planet forever sparking against itself. You ride one last wave of golden air before the atmosphere thickens again, and below you something glints, metal, or at least what used to be metal. You found them, the ghosts of machines, the relics of human optimism melted into the rock. They are scattered across the plains like fossils of curiosity, the Venera probes, the Vega balloons, the American Pioneer and Magellan instruments that fell to chance. Every piece of them tells the same story. We touched Venus, and she touched back. You descend carefully through haze so dense it feels like syrup, and the temperature spikes instantly. Even in imagination, the heat is unbearable, pressing against your skin like a furnace door. The first Venera to survive the descent was Venera 7 in 1970. It plunged through the thick clouds, its parachute tearing halfway down, its sensors screaming with noise as temperatures rose past 400 degrees Celsius. When it hit the surface, it toppled on its side, antenna half buried in hot dust, and yet, somehow, for 23 minutes, it transmitted a faint heartbeat of data. The first whispers ever sent from another planet's ground. You can almost hear it now, a crackling monotone buried in static, telling Earth, it's real, it's hot, I'm dying. There's something heroic about that signal. Less triumph, more sacrifice. You drift closer to a newer relic, Venera 13, the most successful of them all. It landed in 1982 east of Phoebe Reggio and survived for 2 hours and 7 minutes, an eternity in Venus time. Its cameras opened like tired eyes and captured the first colour photographs of the surface, flat slabs of orange-tinted rock under a dim, amber sky. Those images, grainy and glowing, are still among the most haunting ever taken. You can almost step into them now, the dusty stones, the curve of the lander's shadow show the horizon so close it feels claustrophobic. Everything looks still, but you know the air there is moving, slow, heavy currents sliding like oil. Historians of space exploration still argue whether the Venera missions were reckless or brilliant. The Soviet engineers had to design equipment that could survive conditions worse than a blast furnace. Titanium shells, pressurized electronics, lenses that wouldn't melt. They tested the machines in giant ovens back on Earth, feeding them carbon dioxide and acid mist until the instruments screamed. And still, each mission lasted only minutes before the planet claimed it. But those minutes changed everything. Before Venera, Venus was a romantic blur in the sky, a morning star. Afterward, it became a tangible world, real and terrifying and beautiful in its hostility. A fringe rumour persists among enthusiasts that one of the Veneras may have captured something moving, an object shifting between frames of an image, like a rock that changes shape. Officially, it's noise, compression error. Unofficially, it's a campfire for imagination, the idea that something somehow could stir in that heat. You smile at the thought, not because you believe it, but because every good story needs a ghost. Venus's ghosts just happen to be made of steel. You float over the remnants of another fallen craft, Magellan's End perhaps, or the Vega 2 descent module. The metal has softened, edges rounded, the entire thing fused with rock like a relic of some forgotten industrial civilization. You wonder whether, in 1 billion years, any trace will remain, or if Venus's next resurfacing will erase them completely. She doesn't keep souvenirs. Every so often she melts everything clean, even human pride. You kneel beside one of the old probes and brush your hand across its pitted surface. The texture is strange, half metal, half mineral. The colour, a dull copper grey under the sulphur glow, blends almost perfectly with the surrounding stone. You realise that the line between artefact and geology is already fading. The probe isn't resting on Venus, it's becoming Venus. That's the planet's final embrace. She doesn't destroy what we send, she absorbs it. There's a strange comfort in that thought. A spark of humour breaks through the awe. You can almost picture a future archaeologist from another civilization landing here millions of years from now, finding these melted lumps and speculating, ah, yes, primitive offering to the goddess. They sent her tiny ovens as tribute. You laugh softly at the absurdity, though in a way that's exactly what it was. We built our finest machines, wrapped them in armour, and offered them to a world that would melt them like wax candles. There's worship in that, whether we meant it or not. You glance up again, through the thick haze, and remember how scientists had to decode those last transmissions from the landers. Venera 13's final moments were filled with eerie sounds. Hissing wind, faint thumps, electronic heartbeats dissolving into static. Some claim to hear distant rumbling as though the planet itself were breathing. Of course, the rational explanation is data distortion, but still, you listen, and somewhere in that static, you almost hear it too. A slow exhale, deep and ancient. Historians still debate whether we'll ever land there again. The technology exists, modern alloys, advanced cooling systems, but every engineer knows the price. Venus doesn't give easy victories. Even now, proposals like NASA's Veritas and Da Vinci's missions plan to orbit and dip, not linger on the surface. The memory of melted probes still haunts every blueprint. You can't help but feel protective of those old machines, lying quietly in the dust, the first explorers to die for curiosity. You hover above them for a while longer, the heat shimmering around you like liquid glass. The air here bends light, warps colour, and makes the horizon ripple. In that distortion, the old landers almost look alive again, their antennae straightening, their domes glowing faintly from reflection. You know it's just an illusion, but for a second, it feels like they're still transmitting, still whispering through the static. Tell them we saw the sky. A random fringe fact drifts through your thoughts. Some engineers once proposed using Venus's atmosphere itself as a power source for future probes, harnessing the temperature gradient to generate electricity. The concept sounded wild, turning the planet's heat against itself, but it fits Venus's paradoxical nature. Everything destructive here can also sustain, if you're clever enough. It's the same principle that keeps volcanoes forming new rock while erasing the old. You take one last long look at the scattered relics below. Each one represents a story, a heartbeat, a moment when humanity dared to touch the impossible. The air shimmers, the view blurs, and slowly the shapes dissolve back into gold. You rise through the haze again, carrying their ghosts with you. It feels like leaving a graveyard, but not one of sorrow, one of reverence. They came, they melted, they spoke, and in their silence they left behind proof that even in a world built from fire, curiosity burns hotter still. You drift upward again, higher than the melted bones of the Venera probes, higher than the volcanic plains, until the air cools to something you could almost call gentle. Here, around 50 to 60 kilometers above the surface, the pressure matches that of Earth at sea level, and the temperature drops to a tolerable 30 degrees Celsius. It is the one sanctuary in all of Venus's vast hostility, a narrow ribbon of habitability suspended in acid and light. If life ever found a way to survive here, this would be its refuge. You float quietly, letting that possibility bloom in your mind. Maybe, just maybe, you're not alone in this golden swamps. The idea isn't new. In 1967, even before the first landers reached the surface, Carl Sagan suggested that Venus's upper clouds might harbour microscopic organisms, drifting like spores. The surface, he reasoned, was too hot for anything familiar, but the temperate middle atmosphere might mimic the conditions of early Earth. Sunlight filters through, carbon dioxide is abundant, and sulfur compounds could serve as chemical fuel. All that's missing is water, and there may be just enough mixed within the acid droplets to keep a microbe alive. It sounds fantastical, but then again, so does everything about this planet. Historians of science still argue whether Sagan's idea was wild speculation or subtle foresight. You peer into the mist. The droplets here are tiny, microscopic spheres of sulfuric acid laced with traces of water and other molecules. They sparkle faintly as sunlight scatters through them, creating halos around your vision. If you squint, you can almost imagine that some of them move against the wind, drifting with purpose. The thought sends a chill up your spine. Or maybe that's the thin coolness of this layer brushing against your imaginary suit. It's beautiful and eerie all at once, like watching dust motes float in cathedral light and realizing they might be alive. The search for life in these clouds reignited in 2020 when astronomers announced they detected phosphine, a rare gas associated with biological activity on Earth. The signal came from radio telescopes peering through Venus's veil, and for a moment the world gasped. Phosphine shouldn't exist in those quantities, not without something replenishing it. Microbes perhaps metabolizing in the haze? The headlines were electric. Life on Venus. But as quickly as hope rose, skepticism followed. Other scientists reanalyzed the data and found inconsistencies suggesting the signal was noise or sulfur dioxide misinterpreted. The debate became a modern echo of Sagan's dream. Historians still argue whether that faint chemical whisper was the first sign of alien life, or just an interplanetary false alarm. You hover among the droplets, listening to the faint hum of the planet. The air smells faintly metallic in your imagination, like rain on steel. You picture microscopic creatures, if they exist, coated in thick protective shells, floating on the acid like balloons. They'd have to be incredibly resilient, using sulfur for energy, repairing themselves faster than the acid can eat them. Maybe they aren't even alive in the way you understand life. Maybe they're chemical ghosts, patterns of reaction that copy themselves in mist and light. You can almost see them now, tiny glimmers moving through the haze, luminous like fireflies under amber glass. A stray joke bubbles up in your thoughts. Somewhere a single-celled organism is out there doing its best to thrive in acid clouds while we complain about Monday. It's oddly humbling. Life doesn't care about comfort, it cares about persistence. You glance around and realise that if those microbes exist, they've probably been here for billions of years, watching the planet evolve from oceanic calm to volcanic chaos, adapting to each catastrophe with patient chemistry. Maybe they even remember the time when the surface wasn't yet hell, when seas reflected sunlight instead of flames. You float closer to one of the shimmering cloud banks and imagine scooping up a handful of droplets in a collection vial. Each one refracts into a halo around your fingers. Within that glow, maybe something stirs. The acid burns imaginary holes in your glove, but you ignore it. Curiosity is always worth the sting. You hold the droplet close, watching it quiver, and in that tremble you see motion. Not random Brownian chaos, but rhythm, like the flutter of something alive trying not to be noticed. The image vanishes as quickly as it appears, leaving you wondering whether it was real or wishful thinking. Venus, after all, loves to trick the eye. A historical parallel slips into your thoughts. In the late 19th century, astronomers once thought they saw canals on Mars, evidence, they believed, of civilization. It turned out to be optical illusion, our brain stitching order into randomness. Maybe the same is true here. Maybe the patterns in the mist are just wind and light, not life. But even if they are illusions, they reveal something about us. We want to find company in the universe, even if we have to imagine it. You rise a little higher, into thinner air, where the acid rain turns to mist and the wind hums softly. From this altitude, you can see how the cloud decks layer over one another, 3 main strata like a cosmic cake. The topmost is a reflective cap, bright white from sulfur dioxide crystals. The middle is denser, more opaque. The lowest murky and orange. You're drifting now in the middle layer, the one scientists call temperate. It's here that the Vega balloons once sailed, their instruments brushing the same droplets that might harbour microscopic wanderers. For 2 days they floated through this world of gold, recording pressure, temperature and chemical scent. When their signals died, it wasn't from heat but from darkness. Venus's night swallowed them whole. You can almost feel the same fade now. The light dims as you cross into the planet's shadow, and the droplets around you glow faintly from their own fluorescence, or maybe from the last scraps of sunlight scattering through the mist. It feels alive in here, like standing inside a living lung, everything breathing and moving in slow harmony. You wonder whether the first living thing on Venus looked like this, a bubble, fragile and luminous, suspended between death and survival. A small chuckle escapes you. If life really exists here, imagine the existential shock it would feel learning that we, the so-called intelligent beings, built our homes out of steel instead of drifting peacefully in golden acid clouds. You shake your head, amused at your own sentimentality. It's hard not to anthropomorphize everything, even microbes. You tilt your gaze downward again. Beneath the mist, far below, the surface glows dimly like the lid of a buried furnace. Up here, though, it's cool enough to dream. The possibility of life, however microscopic, however strange, turns Venus from tragedy into mystery. You breathe out slowly, the vapor of your breath joining the endless swirl of the clouds. Maybe there's something here, floating beside you, watching back with invisible eyes. Or maybe the only life in this layer right now is the thought itself, the human longing to find kinship in a world that should be barren. Either way, it feels right to whisper to the golden haze, if you're there, keep going. Because if life can persist here, In acid, in darkness, in heat, then maybe persistence is the closest thing the universe has to love. You linger in that glowing mist, the clouds swirling lazily around you like breath from a sleeping giant. The silence is immense, broken only by the whisper of acid rain dissolving into vapor. There's a weight to the air here, not just physical but mythic, as though every droplet carries the stories humans have told about this planet for thousands of years. Venus, the brightest light in our twilight skies, the morning star, the evening star, the eternal symbol of beauty. Yet here, up close, she feels nothing like the goddess of love. She's closer to a deity of endurance, her allure sharpened by pain. The world below doesn't care for poetry, but humans do, and so we gave her one. You can almost see the myths forming around you, swirling with the clouds. To the Babylonians, she was Ishtar, the goddess of both love and war. To the Greeks, she was Aphrodite, born from the foam of the sea. To the Romans, Venus herself, whose name still glows across our sky each dawn and dusk. The Maya tracked her cycles so obsessively that wars and sacrifices were timed to her rising. When she appeared as the morning star, they believed she heralded both creation and destruction. And maybe they were right. Even now, Venus represents both, the beauty of creation and the horror of a world consumed by its own heat. A streak of light ripples across the clouds like a visual echo of those ancient associations. You drift, thinking about how every civilization has projected its desires onto this glowing world. Historians still argue whether Venus's brilliance inspired more art or more fear. Some saw her as a bringer of fertility, others as an omen of war. The Aztecs, for instance, tied her to the god Quetzalcoatl, who descended into the underworld and rose again with Venus's light. To see her too bright, too early was considered dangerous, a sign that the balance between worlds had shifted. You imagine the priests standing on stone pyramids, staring at the same bright orb that now burns behind these clouds, reading destiny in its gleam. It's oddly poetic that the planet named for love has killed every machine we've ever sent to meet her. Maybe that's fitting. Love and destruction have always shared an orbit. You think of the Veneralanders again, their brief lives like tragic romances. They fell for her glow, got too close and were obliterated in minutes. Venus doesn't do half measures. She gives everything, light, heat, beauty, and takes everything in return. You glance down through the haze, imagining how her light looks from Earth right now. Someone, somewhere, is standing on their balcony, pointing up at the evening sky. They're probably calling it a star. Maybe they're thinking of someone they miss. They don't know you're here, suspended in her atmosphere, seeing the goddess up close, and realizing how heartbreakingly wrong and right those myths were all along. A small smile creeps across your face. Myths aren't lies. They're translations, ways for people to understand forces too vast to touch. Venus has always demanded translation. The ancient Greeks saw her as the planet of beauty, the Romans of desire, astrologers of harmony and temptation. And then science arrived and stripped away her veil, revealing acid and fire where we once imagined silken song. Yet somehow the myth survived. People still call her the morning star, still write love poems under her light, still whisper wishes when she appears near the horizon. You remember how Galileo, peering through his crude telescope in 1610, saw Venus's phases change, crescent half full, just like the moon. That simple observation shattered centuries of dogma, proving she orbited the sun, not Earth. Historians still marvel at how that discovery reshaped humanity's place in the cosmos. Venus, goddess of love, accidentally helped dethrone humanity from the center of creation. It's a wonderfully ironic legacy. The planet of beauty, the muse of poets, also became the destroyer of arrogance. A streak of humor slides into your thoughts. Maybe that's why she spins backward, to remind us that the universe doesn't revolve around us, and never did. You chuckle softly, the sound swallowed by the thick air. Venus would appreciate the irony. After all, she spent billions of years proving that beauty can be lethal, and that even hell can shimmer like a gem. You rise higher into thinner light. The clouds above begin to glow like candle wax, diffusing sunlight into a warm golden halo. From here, the planet's curvature is visible again. A vast luminous sphere wrapped in eternal haze. It looks serene, deceptively so. You realize that if you didn't know better, you'd call it peaceful. Humans have always done that, looked at distant things and mistaken brightness for benevolence. Historians still argue whether our fascination with Venus has less to do with astronomy and more to do with projection. She's everything we fear and desire in equal measure. Beautiful but untouchable, radiant but deadly, eternally visible yet forever hidden. In that sense, Venus is the perfect mirror for humanity. We too shine brightest when viewed from far away. A faint tremor passes through the air, or maybe through your thoughts. You imagine the planet below murmuring, its molten heart still restless. For all her mythic calm, Venus is not still, she seethes. The same energy that forged her brilliance also keeps her surface in motion, a slow boil of rock and gas. You wonder if the ancients somehow felt that truth, even without science. If their myths of fiery descent and rebirth weren't just metaphors but premonitions. There's a quiet moment now where everything around you feels both ancient and new. The clouds pulse softly, the light flickers in amber rhythms, and you realize you're floating between two realities, one made of myth, the other of molecules. Venus doesn't mind which one you choose. She's both goddess in geology, symbol and sphere, and she's patient. She's been waiting billions of years for someone to notice the difference doesn't matter. You breathe deeply, or imagine that you do, and the air tastes faintly metallic like the scent of an old coin. The glow above you brightens as the planet turns slowly toward its perpetual dawn. For the first time, you feel the myth and the science overlapping perfectly, as if all those ancient stories weren't wrong at all. They just used different language. The goddess of love isn't gone, she's right here, burning quietly under her veil, teaching that beauty isn't fragile, it's fierce, and as the sunlight seeps through, wrapping everything in molten gold, you whisper a final thought to the planet that once ruled our skies. You were never the goddess of love, you were love itself, terrifying, unyielding and eternal. The light brightens around you until everything glows the colour of molten honey. You rise higher still, beyond the highest acid clouds, where the air thins to near nothing, and the edge of space shimmers just above your head. Here, the planet's veil ends, and you can finally see what no surface observer ever could, the curve of Venus hanging beneath a sky black as ink. Above you stretches the cosmos, unfiltered, infinite. Below you, a sea of gold. This is where myth meets astronomy, where beauty becomes geometry. You're no longer inside the storm, you're watching it from above, and for the first time since your descent began, Venus looks calm. From this height, she truly lives up to her title as the brightest object in Earth's night sky. Her clouds, thick with sulfuric acid, reflect sunlight so efficiently that nearly 3/4 of it bounces straight back into space. That's why she shines so fiercely in our skies, outshining every star and even Jupiter. It's also why, for thousands of years, people have looked up at her and felt something ancient stir, a mix of awe and unease. You imagine those first humans, long before telescopes or science, standing under a darkening sky and watching that single light appear. No wonder they made her divine. You look toward the horizon, and from here the view stretches endlessly. The upper clouds form sweeping patterns, bands and spirals sculpted by the jet streams that circle the planet every 4 Earth days. You can almost see the motion, slow but unstoppable, like paint swirling in oil. These winds move 60 times faster than the planet itself, which means the clouds you're watching will circle the entire globe while the surface below barely turns. It's a cosmic irony. The air moves faster than the world it belongs to. Venus never stops contradicting herself. Historians of planetary science still argue how those super-rotating winds began. Some believe it's the result of the planet's thick atmosphere heating unevenly. Others say the slow rotation creates a tug-of-war between sunlight and darkness that drives the flow. Whatever the cause, it gives the planet a rhythm, a heartbeat visible even from Earth. Every few days, subtle patterns shift across the cloud tops, captured by telescopes and spacecraft. The same dance, repeated endlessly, has turned into a kind of cosmic metronome, a slow pulse you can almost feel under your ribs as you float here, weightless and stagnant. You glance upward toward the blackness of space and spot a faint blue glow at the edge of the horizon, the planet's night side. It's not true darkness. Even where sunlight cannot reach, the atmosphere emits a strange light called airglow. a faint electric shimmer caused by charged particles recombining after sunset. The effect gives Venus a halo, a soft ring of turquoise fire that separates her from the void. It's the sort of beauty you could mistake for serenity, though you know it's really chemistry, atoms colliding, electrons falling, energy bleeding off into light. Still, you can't help but find it romantic. You turn your gaze toward where Earth would be, a distant point of pale blue light against the black. From here it looks fragile, almost translucent, like a soap bubble floating beside the sun. You feel a pang of recognition, or maybe nostalgia. Earth and Venus began so alike, two siblings of rock and heat. But now, separated by a runaway greenhouse and a few 100 million kilometers, they seem like estranged twins, one lush, one scarred, both still circling the same parent star. The contrast is sharp enough to hurt. A fringe fact drifts through your memory. The ancient Greeks called Venus Phosphoros when she appeared at dawn, and Hesperus when she appeared at dusk, believing they were two different bodies. It took centuries to realize they were one and the same. Even now, she plays that double role. Morning star and evening star, promise and warning, love and destruction. Historians still argue whether the human tendency to divide her into two personas says more about her or about us. We've always needed our symbols tidy, our gods labelled. Venus refuses that convenience. She's both dawn and dusk, both beginning and end. The view from this altitude makes her dual nature almost literal. On one side of the planet, the clouds blaze white under sunlight. On the other, they dim to amber shadow. Between them stretches the twilight belt, a ribbon of perpetual sunset circling her waist. It's easy to see why ancient skywatchers thought she embodied transition. You drift along that border now, watching day blend into night with no sharp line, just a slow dissolve of gold into bronze. It feels like extending between worlds. You think about all the times Venus has appeared in literature, Dante's Divine Comedy, where she presides over love, Shakespeare's Venus and Adonis, where passion ends in death, modern songs that use her name to mean beauty that burns. Every generation has rediscovered her and misinterpreted her, and maybe that's the point. She invites misunderstanding. She's too bright to ignore, too distant to grasp. Even her light plays tricks. When seen through Earth's atmosphere, she often sparkles like a jewel, but that twinkle is our air distorting her perfection. The universe has a sense of humour. You adjust your imaginary position, floating just above the atmosphere now, where the clouds fade to wisps and the curvature of the planet fills your view. From here, the scale is overwhelming. The faintest movement of your eyes covers hundreds of kilometers. If you could reach out, your hand would cast a shadow across continents. You can see the polar vortex now, a swirling double-eyed storm that crowns the North Pole, spinning endlessly like a galactic whirlpool. Each vortex is big enough to swallow the Europe, and yet from here it looks no larger than a coin. The top of the planet glows faintly in infrared, heat bleeding from within. It's a reminder that even from space, Venus radiates defiance. A smile tugs at you. There's humour in this view too, a cosmic prank. Venus, the planet we once called Earth's twin, has no moon, no oceans, no blue. She shines brightest not because she gives light, but because she rejects it. She's beautiful by refusal, a mirror too perfect to look into for long. You chuckle quietly at the thought, the goddess of love built entirely on reflection. Historians still debate whether the brightness of Venus has influenced more human behaviour than any other celestial body. Farmers once planted by her cycle, poets timed their metaphors to her rise, navigators used her light to set bearings at sea. She has been both compass and curse. You imagine ancient sailors staring up from the deck of a ship, calling her their star of return, never realizing she was a planet hotter than molten iron. Knowledge changes everything, but wonder remains. The sunlight catches the edge of the atmosphere again, creating a thin golden arc around the curve of the planet. It looks like a crown, radiant and delicate. You feel a strange kind of reverence, not worship exactly, but gratitude. For all her violence and mystery, Venus has given humanity a mirror, a lesson and a muse. She's proof that beauty and danger aren't opposites. They're the same thing viewed from different distances. As you drift back toward the twilight belt, the planet below begins to fade into amber and gold once more. The horizon stretches out like an infinite shoreline of light. Somewhere beyond that horizon, Earth is watching. writing poems about a star that isn't a star at all. You smile, letting the thoughts settle, and whisper softly into the void. Keep shining, you stubborn, beautiful thing. You hang there at the edge of space, balanced between sunlight and shadow, and for the first time you allow yourself to wonder what came before the storms, what this planet looked like before it turned gold and deadly. The thought feels like stepping backward through time, through heat and chemistry, until the haze thins, the pressure lifts, and an ancient ocean glimmers where the plains now burn. Scientists have spent decades trying to reconstruct that lost world, using radar maps, isotope ratios, and imagination, and what they've pieced together is haunting. Venus, the hell planet, may once have been blue. You can almost see it now, shallow seas rippling under a pale yellow sun, clouds of water vapour drifting instead of acid, the air clear enough for sunlight to reach the surface without distortion. The evidence lies hidden in the chemistry of the atmosphere. When probes measured the ratio of deuterium, heavy hydrogen, to regular hydrogen in Venus's air, they found it was hundreds of times higher than on Earth. That's a sign, scientists say, that oceans once existed and later evaporated, the lighter hydrogen escaping into space, while the heavier isotopes lingered. Historians of planetary science still debate how deep those oceans might have been. Some say shallow global lakes, others believe they covered much of the surface, forming continents and coasts like our own. Either way, water once shaped this planet, and its loss changed everything. You imagine walking along that primordial shore. The gravity is nearly Earth-like, the breeze warm but not lethal. The waves lap gently at volcanic black sand. Overhead, the sky glows a soft copper hue, hazed slightly from the sun's brighter youth but still calm, still breathable. You picture clouds drifting lazily, rain falling as water instead of acid, rivers etching channels that would one day fossilize into the lava plains we see now. Perhaps there were lightning storms and maybe, just maybe, organic chemistry sparking in puddles, amino acids forming, molecules dancing, a world on the verge of something miraculous. Then slowly the balance tipped. The young sun brightened, just a little. 2 or 3% was enough. The oceans began to evaporate faster than they could replenish. More water vapour filled the air, and since water is itself a greenhouse gas, it trapped even more heat. The seas turned to mist, the mist to steam, the steam to extinction. The runaway effect began, slow but irreversible. Within a few million years, the oceans boiled away entirely, leaving only salt flats and baked crust. The water that once cooled the planet became its executioner. You can almost hear the hiss of steam escaping into the sky, like the sound of a kettle that never stops boiling. Historians still argue whether the catastrophe was inevitable or avoidable. Some say Venus was doomed from the start, too close to the sun for water to survive indefinitely. Others propose that volcanic outgassing accelerated the process, pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere faster than weathering could remove it. Either way, the chain reaction ended the same way. An ocean planet turned into an oven. You drift above what was once a seafloor, now a vast basaltic plain shimmering faintly in the light. The irony stings. Venus, goddess of love, drowned not in water but in heat. You imagine what creatures might have swum in those vanished oceans if life had begun before the world burned. Maybe simple microbes clinging to hydrothermal vents, like Earth's earliest organisms. Maybe nothing at all, just chemistry forever, on the edge of becoming biology. The thought feels tender, like touching a fossil that never had a chance to form. If life ever began here, it ended quietly, evaporated with the seas. Yet part of you can't shake the feeling that something of it remains, a chemical memory drifting in the clouds, a whisper in the acid rain. A small dark joke bubbles up. Somewhere, an alternate universe's history book lists Venus as the planet where climate change won. You smile wryly, then let the thought fade. It's too easy to turn tragedy into metaphor, but you can't help seeing the resemblance. Earth and Venus began the same way, same size, same mass, same ingredients. One stayed balanced, the other lost control. It's like looking at a cautionary version of ourselves, frozen in time. As you glide over the glowing plains, radar images come to mind. Those ancient maps showing channels that twist like riverbeds, delta patterns carved into rock. Some scientists insist they're lava flows, not watercourse. Others disagree. Historians still debate whether the surface once hosted rainfall, brief and warm, before the atmosphere thickened beyond hope. You like to imagine those rains anyway, fat drops sizzling on hot rock, steam rising in gentle spirals. It's the kind of beauty that only exists in fleeting moments. You drift toward the highlands of Ishtar Terra, the closest thing Venus has to a continent. The land rises steeply into golden haze, and for a moment you pretend it's still green, covered in fern-like vegetation waving in a sulphur-scented wind. The illusion doesn't last long. The image melts back into the glowing heat of the present, but it's enough to make you ache for the world that was. A historical tidbit sneaks into your thoughts. Early science fiction writers once imagined Venus as a tropical paradise, swamps, jungles, eternal rain. In pulp novels of the 1940s and 50s, explorers crashed through misty canopies filled with alien creatures. When radar data arrived decades later proving the surface was a furnace, those dreams died overnight. But maybe, in a strange way, those writers weren't entirely wrong. They just arrived too late. Their paradise existed, just not in their time. You pause above a vast basin, once thought to be an ancient ocean bed. The sunlight catches the atmosphere just right, and for a fleeting instant the haze turns blue, as if the planet itself remembers. The effect lasts only a heartbeat before fading back to amber, but you swear you saw it. Maybe memory isn't limited to living things, maybe worlds remember too, encoded in minerals and isotopes, waiting for someone to listen. You wonder what it must have felt like for Venus to lose her oceans, to feel her veins dry up, her skin crack under heat, her air grow heavy. If planets could grieve, you think she might have mourned for a long time, but then again, perhaps she didn't mourn at all. Perhaps she simply changed the way everything must. Transformation, not tragedy. You exhale softly, letting that thought dissolve in the gold around you. The surface below glows brighter as the sun rises fully over the horizon, and for a moment you catch your reflection in the haze. You look ghostly, spectral, hovering between what was and what is. The lost oceans ripple faintly beneath you, invisible but not forgotten. You reach out as if to touch them and whisper, "I believe you were beautiful once." You rise again into the bright upper air, the lost oceans shrinking to memory below, and the golden horizon curving softly around the world. It's time to dream forward instead of backward. If Venus once held oceans, could she one day hold them again? You picture the planet cooled and reborn, her thick clouds thinning, her surface hardening into gentle plains. Terraforming, the art of turning the unlivable into livable, has always fascinated scientists and storytellers alike. And Venus, despite her furnace soul, tempts them all. She's Earth's near twin, after all. If she could be broken by chemistry, maybe chemistry could save her too. You imagine the first step, cooling the planet. The most famous proposal belongs to Carl Sagan himself back in the 1960s, when optimism still hummed louder than caution. His idea was bold: seed the atmosphere with genetically engineered microbes that could convert carbon dioxide into organic compounds, gradually thinning the air and reducing the greenhouse effect. But Venus laughed at that plan. Her acid clouds and searing heat would incinerate even the most stubborn life. Historians still argue whether Sagan's microbes were visionary or naive. Either way, they were the first dream of turning hell into home. Modern proposals are no less dramatic. One concept involves building a giant solar shade, a thin reflective disk placed between Venus and the Sun, large enough to block some of the incoming light. Over centuries, the planet would cool, its clouds condensing and perhaps raining carbon back onto the surface. The air would thin, the pressure drop, and maybe, just maybe, the rock would stop glowing red. You can almost see it now, a massive silver umbrella casting eternal twilight across a world too bright for its own good. It's both absurd and elegant, the kind of cosmic engineering humans invent when they're feeling especially clever. Another scheme suggests using fleets of automated factories to float in the upper atmosphere, sucking in carbon dioxide and spitting out oxygen and graphite. Like mechanical algae, they'd drift through the haze, manufacturing a breathable world molecule by molecule. You can picture them, millions of gleaming balloons glowing softly in the twilight, slowly turning poison into promise. There's beauty in that image, and also irony. Venus would become a paradise not through divine intervention, but through bureaucracy, endless floating machines filing chemical paperwork in the sky. A fringe plan takes things even further. Some dreamers propose redirecting icy asteroids from the outer solar system, crashing them into Venus to deliver water and strip away atmosphere. A celestial makeover by impact. The collisions would be catastrophic, yes, but the result could be oceans reborn. Historians still debate whether such violence could ever yield peace. You can almost imagine Venus rolling her eyes. "Oh sure, you boiled my seas. So now you're going to throw rocks at me." And you can't help laughing quietly in your helmet. But for all the math and metal and grand design, the truth is simple. Venus doesn't want to be saved. Her balance, brutal as it is, has held for billions of years. Terraforming her would mean erasing what she is, reshaping her into Earth's reflection. There's a philosophical unease in that. Maybe we dream of colonizing her not because we should, but because we can't stand the thought of beauty existing without belonging to us. You float there, caught between admiration and guilt, wondering whether saving Venus would be an act of love or arrogance. Still, hope persists. NASA engineers sketch concepts for floating habitats, colonies suspended in the upper atmosphere, where conditions are tolerable. Picture it, vast dirigibles filled with breathable air, buoyant by nature, drifting through golden clouds. Below lies the inferno, above the thin blue of space. The people who would live there wouldn't terraform Venus. They'd adapt to her, learn to exist within her limits instead of changing them. The idea feels gentler, humbler. Humans wouldn't conquer the planet. They'd coexist, like moths in her eternal dusk. You imagine those floating cities in vivid detail. Gardens sealed inside domes, their plants fed by filtered sunlight. Observation decks wrapped in glass, where explorers watch the clouds flash with silent lightning. Children growing up never touching solid ground, their concept of home suspended between heaven and hell. The hum of engines replaces birdsong, and every sunrise glows gold through acid mist. It's not paradise, but it's something new, a different kind of beauty, one that thrives on compromise. A tiny historical fact slips in like a whisper. In the late 20th century, Soviet engineers studied plans for crewed Venus missions using aerostats, giant balloons capable of hovering for weeks in the planet's upper atmosphere. They even ran tests in simulated conditions. Though the missions never flew, the blueprints remain tucked away in archives, dusty but ready. It's strange to think that decades ago, humanity already dreamed of drifting among these clouds long before we even walked on Mars. You look down at the glowing horizon again, and for the first time you imagine it peaceful. The idea of people living here, of laughter echoing through golden mist, feels almost believable. Venus, the world that burned every visitor demu, might one day cradle us in her clouds. Historians still argue whether such visions are science or faith, but in this quiet moment it doesn't matter. The line between the two blurs easily when you're floating between fire and sunlight. You think of Earth, your own fragile blue world, and realise that every dream of terraforming Venus is also a confession. We're not trying to save her, we're trying to save ourselves, from our mistakes, from our fragility, from the inevitability of change. Venus is our mirror, showing what happens when balance breaks. To restore her would be to redeem that reflection. Whether that's noble or narcissistic depends on who's telling the story. A light joke drifts through your thoughts, you imagine some future Venusian weather report. Partly cloudy with a chance of acid rain. Good news, the air only kills you in 5 minutes now instead of 1. You smile despite yourself. Humour, even here, survives. It's humanity's most reliable climate control. The light fades slightly as the sun dips toward the horizon, turning the clouds bronze. You hover there, lost between imagination and physics, between what is and what could be. Terraforming, you think, isn't about rewriting nature. It's about believing that the universe still has chapters left to write. Maybe one day Venus will be blue again, maybe not. But the dream alone, humans daring to whisper someday into the face of fire, feels like progress. You tilt your head back, watching the sunlight scatter across the mist and whisper softly, "Don't change for us unless you want to." Venus doesn't answer, of course. She doesn't need to. The air itself glows with enough warmth to mean maybe. You linger at the edge of that dream, still hovering in your mind above those imagined floating cities, when a flicker of motion in the upper haze catches your eye. It's small, sharp, deliberate, a flash of metal against sunlight. For a heartbeat you think it's a memory of Magellan, or one of the Vega balloons resurrected. But then you recognize the shape. Sleek, modern, and very much alive. It's a new visitor, one that hasn't yet arrived in reality but already exists in blueprints and promises. This is the decade of return. Humanity is coming back to Venus. Below you, the haze brightens as if aware of the attention. NASA's upcoming missions, Da Vinci Plus, Veritas, and Europe's Envision, are poised to pierce that veil again, to ask the planet the questions we never stopped muttering into static. You can almost see them assembling in your imagination. Engineers hunched over screens, spacecraft components gleaming under white laboratory lights, tiny models of this world projected in 3D holograms. After decades of Mars obsession, the goddess of the morning star has finally lured our eyes back. Historians still argue why it took so long. Maybe we were afraid of what she'd remind us about ourselves. You drift closer to the imagined Da Vinci Plus probe, its instruments unfurling like the petals of a metallic flower. Its full name, Deep Atmosphere Venus Investigation of Noble Gases, Chemistry and Imaging, sounds clinical, but the mission itself is romantic in its ambition. The craft will drop a spherical descent module through the thick clouds, measuring pressure, temperature and composition all the way down, snapping photos as it falls. For the first time since the 1980s, we'll see Venus's sky not as theory but as lived experience. You imagine those images arriving at mission control, golden light diffusing through mist, droplets gleaming like tiny suns. Each photograph will be a love letter from a world that hasn't written to us in half a century. Veritas, its companion mission, will orbit above, mapping the surface with radar even sharper than Magellan's. It will look for signs of tectonic activity, for lava flow still cooling, for places where the crust may be shifting beneath the heat. If Da Vinci Plus gives us a diary entry, Veritas will give us an X-ray. Together they'll answer the old question, is Venus still alive? Or at least they'll try. You think of the engineers naming the spacecraft Veritas, Latin for truth, as if they know the planet won't yield it easily. Above them, Europe's Envision spacecraft will follow, using its instruments to peer through the clouds and into the planet's history. It will map minerals, study the chemical fingerprints of past volcanic eruptions, and compare Venus's geological evolution to Earth's. Historians still debate which mission will launch first, but it hardly matters. After decades of silence, Venus will once again be the center of our attention. She's waited long enough. You hover in your imagination beside one of these orbiters as it circles the planet, sunlight glinting off its solar panels. The view is breathtaking, a smooth golden sphere wrapped in haze, its poles crowned with whirling storms. You can almost hear the hum of instruments, the faint chatter of data beamed back across millions of kilometers. Somewhere in a control room on Earth, scientists are watching, holding their breath as the first readings trickle in. Numbers, charts, images, all translating Venus's secrets into human understanding. It's like hearing a goddess whisper equations. A historical irony makes you smile. When the first Soviet probes landed on Venus, they were racing the Americans to prove technological supremacy. This new era feels different. The competition is still there, yes, but quieter, replaced by curiosity. Venus is no longer a battleground for pride. She's a mirror for humility. Each mission acknowledges how little we know, how vast her mysteries remain. Even her nearest neighbours in the solar system don't behave like her. Historians of planetary science still argue whether Venus holds more lessons about exoplanets than about Earth itself. After all, most planets we've discovered around other stars are super Venuses, hot, dense, cloud-covered. In learning about this world, we may learn what most of the universe actually looks like. As you drift above the glowing hemisphere, another shape joins the vision, a concept craft that doesn't yet have a name, just a dream. Engineers talk about autonomous drones flying through the atmosphere, gliding from layer to layer, sampling air, scanning terrain. Others imagine balloon fleets communicating like fireflies, each carrying sensors to map the electrical storms. You picture them dancing through the acid mist, silent messengers collecting the breath of a planet that hasn't spoken in eons. And maybe, one day, there will be humans again. The thought feels both thrilling and terrifying. A small capsule descending through the clouds, its metal glowing from friction, the crew watching the pressure gauge rise higher than anything experienced before. Perhaps they'll only stay in the middle atmosphere, floating in high-altitude habitats like those we imagined earlier. Maybe one of them will stand at a window and whisper, "We made it." The first words ever spoken from Venus, not to her. A faint joke slips into your mind. The planet might respond by melting their microphone just to remind them who's in charge. You smile, because even humour here feels reverent. Venus demands a certain humility, the kind that comes only from knowing how easily she could erase you. You look down again, at the molten plains hidden beneath the clouds, and think about how those future spacecraft will map every centimetre, every crater, every volcano. They'll find patterns, correlations, clues. Maybe they'll prove that the planet's surface still shifts, that her volcanoes still sigh with molten breath. Or maybe they'll find silence, a frozen furnace holding its last heat. Either answer feels holy. Historians will argue for centuries about what these missions mean, whether they're the beginning of a new age of exploration or simply humanity's nostalgic return to its first heartbreak. For now, though, you feel the anticipation humming through space itself. The future is already orbiting. You drift upward, away from the imagined spacecraft, until Venus fills half the sky beneath you, a shining marble wrapped in mist. Somewhere down there, machines will soon fall again through the golden haze. Somewhere up here, humans will watch and listen, hearts pounding as data becomes revelation. You whisper to yourself, "She's letting us back in." And for the first time in this long, dreamy journey, you believe it. You linger above the golden world, staring down into its glowing clouds, and slowly your gaze drifts outward, toward the black velvet sea of space. Off to one side, faint but familiar, a smaller red shimmer catches your attention. Mars, our other neighbour, the one we've courted endlessly while Venus sulked in her furnace solitude. The contrast between them is startling. One too hot, the other too cold, Earth balancing delicately in between. You can't help thinking of them as siblings in a family of extremes. Venus is the sister who burns too brightly, Mars the brother who let the fire die out. And Earth, well, Earth is the one still trying to keep the peace at the dinner table. You imagine all three of them lined up in sunlight, the inner solar system spread like a lesson on balance. The comparison has always fascinated scientists. Venus and Earth began with nearly identical blueprints, same size, same density, same gravitational pull. Mars, smaller and lighter, started with less of everything. Yet their destinies diverged completely. Venus drowned in carbon dioxide, and Mars lost its atmosphere to space, and Earth managed, by some miracle, to walk the line between. Historians still argue whether that balance is luck, design, or simply temporary. You watch the glowing trio and feel the irony. Our homeworld is the exception, not the rule. From this vantage point, it's easy to see why planetary scientists love comparative planetology. Each world tells a part of a shared story about air, water, and time. Venus shows us what happens when the greenhouse effect runs wild. Mars shows us what happens when it fades away. Earth is the precarious middle child caught between fever and frost. You can almost imagine them as three stages of a cosmic cautionary tale. Too much, too little, just enough. The Goldilocks myth retold in Rock and Gas. The air hums faintly in your ears, a soundless vibration, more imagined than real, and you start to think about climate. On Earth, carbon dioxide levels creeping upward have already begun to echo the warnings written in Venus's past. The similarities are impossible to ignore. Thickening air, rising temperatures, feedback loops that feed themselves. Venus is the worst-case scenario writ large across the solar system. Every time you look at her glowing atmosphere, you're staring at a prophecy. Historians of science still debate whether comparing Earth's climate to Venus's is fair, but the symbolism persists. She's the caution sign at the edge of paradise. You picture the scientists who study these connections. They sit in labs filled with screens running simulations of planetary evolution, adjusting one variable at a time, rotation rate, atmospheric density, solar flux, watching worlds live and die in fast forward. They've learnt that even small differences change everything. A planet's orbit 1% closer to its star can push it past a tipping point. You think of Earth wobbling in its fragile equilibrium, and it hits you. Habitable zone isn't a comfort blanket, it's a tightrope. A quirk of astronomy floats into your thoughts. Venus's slow rotation, 243 Earth days per spin, creates bizarre weather patterns. The day side bakes endlessly while the night side never cools, yet the thick air circulates so fast that temperature differences vanish. Mars, with its thin air, does the opposite. Day and night swing from scorching to freezing in hours. You imagine trying to stand on both worlds, one crushing you, the other barely holding you down. The middle planet, Earth, feels suddenly like an impossible coincidence. You let your mind wander to human exploration again. Mars has become the darling of colonization dreams, with its red deserts and reachable conditions. Venus, in comparison, is the dangerous older sibling everyone avoids at family gatherings. But maybe that's changing. As you drift here, you realize both planets hold lessons we can't ignore. Mars teaches humility, how hard it is to build life where there is none. Venus teaches restraint, how easy it is to lose life once you have it. Between the two lies our future, balanced precariously on a line of habitability so thin it could vanish in geological seconds. A flicker of humour surfaces. If the solar system were a group chat, Mars would send sad selfies of its dust storms, Earth would post food pics, and Venus would reply with a single unreadable emoji, something on fire probably. You grin at the absurd image. Humour helps soften the existential vertigo that always comes from these comparisons. It's easier to laugh than to confront how fragile everything is. You look back toward Earth's blue shimmer, barely visible beyond the sun's glare. From here, the differences between the planets seem almost trivial, all just spinning rocks in an endless void. Yet within those details, within chemistry, temperature, and distance lies everything that makes life possible. You can't help but feel awe at how nulled and narrow the boundaries truly are. Venus reminds you that habitability isn't guaranteed, it's borrowed time. A historical tangent nudges you. The 20th century's first atmospheric models of Venus were partly inspired by studies of Earth's own climate. The connection works both ways. Understanding her helps us understand ourselves. The Venus greenhouse model, built decades ago, became a mirror for predicting future warming on Earth. Historians still argue whether it was Venus that taught us humility or fear. Either way, her story became our warning label. As you float there, the wind from Venus's upper atmosphere drifts past, tugging gently at your imaginary suit. The air itself feels alive. Ancient molecules of carbon dioxide swirling, colliding, whispering lessons written in chemistry. You imagine bottling some of that air and taking it home, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. This is what happens when balance breaks. Maybe every planet carries a moral. Mars says, don't let go, and Venus says, don't overreach. And Earth, somewhere in between, says, hold on as long as you can. You think about the future again, the telescopes scanning other stars, finding thousands of exoplanets that blur the line between Earth and Venus. Many of them are hot, dense, cloud-covered, with atmospheres thick enough to crush steel. They're all mini Venuses, glowing in infrared like candles scattered across the galaxy. Studying them brings scientists back here, to this world, our local laboratory of extremes. Venus is no longer just a planet, it's a key, unlocking how common life might be elsewhere and how easily it can vanish. Historians still debate which of the three, Venus, Earth or Mars, will define humanity's legacy. Maybe the answer isn't any single world, but the space between them, the fragile balance we've learned to walk. You glance one last time at Mars's dim red glimmer, and then back to Venus's blazing gold. Together they frame Earth like parentheses around a miracle. A thought settles quietly in your chest. These worlds aren't competing, they're teaching. Each one carries a version of our story written in dust or acid or blue water. Venus warns, Mars mourns, Earth endures, and somewhere beyond all three, the stars keep writing sequels. The light pinches as you turn back toward the planet, no longer the soft gold of distance, but a deeper, molten hue, like the glow inside a forge. The clouds thicken beneath you, rolling in endless tides of fire-coloured mist. You begin to descend again, slowly, letting yourself slip through layers of light and shadow. It feels different this time, less like falling and more like being drawn inward, as if the planet itself wants to show you something. Through the haze, the air turns honey dark, the temperature rising in invisible waves. You're entering the world's heart again, into the place where beauty and horror blur into one shimmering continuum. Every droplet around you catches light and bends it, turning the atmosphere into a hall of mirrors. The deeper you go, the more distorted everything becomes. Venus is not a planet of clear lines. She's a painting done entirely in reflection. From here, you understand why telescopes could never reveal her true face. She isn't hiding, she's refracting. The closer you look, the more she dissolves into possibility. That's what makes her terrifying. That's what makes her beautiful. You press deeper, through air so thick it feels almost solid. The sound changes too, a low hum, deep and resonant, like a note struck inside an enormous instrument. It's not sound exactly, but vibration, the music of pressure and heat. You think of the ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras, who believed planets made their own music, each world humming a tone that formed part of the cosmic harmony. If he was right, Venus's note would be something slow and mournful, the sound of molten patience. Historians still argue whether that music of the spheres was ever meant literally, but floating here, you believe it could be real. Through a thinner patch of haze, you catch glimpses of the ground again, volcanic plains glowing faintly, the light filtered through 20 kilometers of atmosphere. Everything moves as though underwater. The horizon curves, bending under the weight of its own pressure. The heat below isn't violent anymore, it's serene, like a candle burning at the bottom of an ocean. You realize that for all its fury, Venus doesn't rage, it endures. The wind here has slowed to a crawl, dense enough that every movement leaves ripples. You stretch out your hand and feel resistance, like touching liquid glass. The air is thick with chemical ghosts, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, traces of sulfur dioxide, and somewhere within that mixture, faint whispers of metal vapors, lead, zinc, iron dancing invisibly. You're breathing history, though your lungs could never survive it. Each molecule down here is ancient, recycled countless times since the planet's first breath. It's the air of eternity. A strange comfort settles over you. The further you descend, the more Venus feels like something alive, not in the biological sense, but in the geological one. Her crust flexes, her volcanoes sigh, her clouds shimmer with static. She's not dead, she's dreaming in heat. You can almost feel her pulse in the slow undulations of the air. Maybe that's why she resists us so fiercely. She's self-sufficient, complete in her solitude. You think of that line from Vishnu myth, Aphrodite born from the sea foam, fully formed, needing nothing but her own reflection. Venus, the planet, is the same. A flicker of humour sneaks through your awe. You imagine explaining this to some extraterrestrial traveller. Welcome to Venus, no beaches, no breathable air, but the aesthetic is unbeatable. You smile, because even here, surrounded by crushing pressure and acid mist, the planet's design is impeccable. The symmetry of destruction has its own elegance. The deeper you go, the more the light reddens. It's no longer the yellow glow of sunlight, but the dull crimson of thermal radiation. Venus shining with her own inner warmth. The surface heat rises to meet you, a soft, omnipresent hum pressing through every inch of air. You think about the probes that reached this point and melted. Venera 13, Venera 14, their metal skins bubbling like wax, their cameras clouding with soot. For a moment, you swear you can see their ghosts in the haze, outlines of steel silhouettes standing among basalt slabs. They aren't dead, they've simply been absorbed. Venus keeps what she's given. You pause and let your imagination wander. What if you could stand on that surface, somehow protected, and look around? The sky would glow orange, brighter near the horizon, darker overhead. The sun, a faint smudge, would barely cast shadows. The air would shimmer with refracted light, turning every rock into a mirage. Mountains in the distance would appear to float, their shapes bending in the thick atmosphere. Every sound would travel faster but quieter, muffled by density. It would feel like existing inside a slow-motion dream. Historians still debate how stable this surface really is. Some data suggest the crust renews itself every few 100 million years, melting and reforming under internal pressure. Others believe Venus is entering a dormant phase, the fires beneath her crust cooling after eons of rage. Either way, this moment you're imagining, this molten calm, might not last. In another 100 million years, the entire surface could liquefy again, turning into a single sea of lava. You wonder what that would look like from space, an entire planet glowing shed, a candle in orbit. You bend down and touch the imaginary ground. It's smooth, almost oily from the heat. For a second you feel it pulsing faintly under your palm, like the vibration of a distant drumbeat. It's easy to forget that beneath all this mystery lies simple rock, basalt, granite, iron-rich minerals, the same building blocks as Earth. The difference isn't material, it's temperature, timing, chemistry. That's the haunting part. Venus isn't alien. She's familiar turned fatal. You straighten again, the air wavering around you, and realise that beauty and danger have become indistinguishable here. The haze moves in slow swirls of gold and crimson. The ground glows like cooling metal, and the air hums like breath caught in a giant chest. You can't tell whether the planet is exhaling or inhaling, whether this is creation or decay, maybe both. A thought rises quietly in your mind. Every world in the solar system is a mirror showing a different possibility of Earth. Mars shows how life might die quietly. Jupiter and Saturn show how power can exist without form. And Venus shows how beauty can burn itself alive. You whisper it softly, almost reverently. The hidden world isn't hidden at all, it's a reflection. You look up once more, through layers of shimmering haze, toward the pale outline of the clouds far above. They look almost white now, distant and unreachable. You've been to the bottom of the furnace and found calm instead of chaos. For a moment you think that's her final lesson. Even the fiercest fire, if it burns long enough, becomes stillness. You close your eyes and let the planet's warmth wrap around you like a heartbeat made of stone. You stand or float or dream within that molten hush, the air trembling around you, the surface breathing light like an ember that refuses to die. Everything you've seen, its storms, its myths, its lost oceans, its ghosts of metal and fire, feels as if it's gathering here, condensing into one slow, radiant truth. Venus isn't hiding anything anymore. She's simply existing, unapologetic, entire. For all the talk of hellscapes and destruction, there's an unexpected peace at her core. The world that began as Earth's mirror has grown into something far older, far more certain. She no longer needs comparison, she just is. You start to drift upward again, rising through the dense golden air as though ascending through time. Each layer you pass feels like another epoch peeling back. Beneath you, the red light fades into bronze. Above, the haze glows softly like candle smoke. The climb is slow, the gravity patient. You think about everything this planet has taught you, not just about geology and chemistry, but about endurance. She's survived impacts, solar tantrums, billions of years of heat, and the steady glare of a star that keeps getting brighter. And still she turns, lazy and defiant, her clouds catching light like silk in a furnace. There's something sacred in that stubbornness. As you rise, the air grows thinner, cooler, quieter. The humming fades until it's just you and the faint crackle of imagined static. It reminds you of the first signals we ever heard from her surface. Those dying transmissions from the Venera landers, each fading heartbeat an act of bravery. You can almost hear them now, echoing up through the clouds, a language made of data and willpower. Maybe the machines weren't just exploring, maybe they were praying in binary. You wonder if every explorer, human or mechanical, ends up praying in some form. Historians still argue what our fascination with Venus truly means. Is it science, myth, or longing? Some say we're drawn to her because she embodies the extremes we fear in ourselves, the hunger for beauty, the tendency to destroy what we love. Others think it's simpler. She's just there, shining too brightly to ignore. You suspect the truth sits somewhere between the two. Curiosity and desire have always been twins. We chase the things that frighten us because we want to understand what power they hold. Venus's power is her patience. She doesn't chase back, she waits. The clouds thicken again as you reach the middle layers, that narrow band of comfort where the temperature and pressure mimic home. You linger there, imagining a city suspended in the mist, windows glowing softly, engines humming in the wind. People drift inside, sipping recycled water, looking out at the gold beyond the glass. Their whole world is held aloft by air itself. Buoyed by chemistry and faith, you can almost hear them laughing, talking, dreaming. Humanity, stubborn as ever, finding poetry even in poison. A soft chuckle escapes you. The idea that one day people might live here, not conquering, not fixing, but coexisting, feels almost absurd. Yet the longer you think about it, the less absurd it becomes. We've always built homes in impossible places, on mountaintops, beneath oceans, in orbit. Why not here, among the clouds of a planet that taught us the price of beauty? Maybe that's what we do best, not dominate but adapt. Venus would approve of that kind of humility. As you climb, the golden mist begins to glow brighter. The upper atmosphere opens like a curtain, and sunlight floods in, sharp and white. You look up and see the curve of space again, the black vastness dotted with distant stars. For a moment you hesitate. Leaving feels strange, like stepping away from a conversation that isn't finished. You glance back down through the clouds, and for the first time you realise how familiar it looks. The patterns of light and shadow, the swirls of motion, it's not so different from Earth's weather, only slower, heavier, timeless. You think about that, how similar beginnings can diverge so completely. Two planets born from the same dust, one nurturing oceans, the other drowning in them. The difference maybe isn't tragedy, but perspective. Venus reminds you that change is inevitable, that even catastrophe has its own rhythm. The universe doesn't make mistakes, it makes variations. You whisper softly, "You're just the version of Earth that never cooled." The air hums faintly in reply, as if agreeing. A historical tidbit floats up as you break through the topmost haze. In 1610, when Galileo first saw Venus's phases through his telescope, he wrote in his notes, "It imitates the moon." He couldn't have known how right he was. Venus waxes and wanes, not in light but in meaning. To some, she's inspiration. To others, warning. Historians still debate whether we should see her as a failed Earth or as proof that nature experiments endlessly. Either way, she keeps orbiting, unbothered by interpretation. The sunlight above grows blinding now, refracted through the final wisps of cloud. You emerge into open space once more, the planet sprawling beneath you like a living sculpture, glowing white at the poles, gold at the equator, shadowed on her far side. From here, it's impossible to imagine the hell beneath the haze. Distance turns her gentle again. You understand now why the ancients fell in love with her light. She looks like perfection, and from far enough away, she is. You look toward Earth, tiny, blue, impossibly fragile, and realize how much this journey has been about perspective. To see Venus is to see Earth anew. Every storm, every cloud, every warm sunrise suddenly feels precious, precarious. We're just one chemical imbalance away from sharing her fate. The realization doesn't frighten you anymore. It humbles you. The universe is vast, but the rules are intimate. You let yourself drift backward, the planet shrinking beneath you until she becomes a coin of light. Her brilliance sharpens, outshining every other star. For a heartbeat, you understand why humanity named her the goddess of love, not for romance, but for resilience. She's the constant glow that endures both day and night, the beauty that survives her own extremes. As the distance widens, you close your eyes and hear her faint hum one last time. It's not warning or invitation, just a pulse, the steady rhythm of a world that refuses to stop shining. You whisper goodbye, knowing she doesn't need to answer. Venus has always spoken best through silence.